A huge renovation for elder care? $30,000? What's going on? Wait, isn't that my wife's parents' house? Then, I get this strange call from someone claiming to be my estranged sister-in-law's husband. Something doesn't add up here. It seems like my sister-in-law might be plotting something. Hi, I'm Martha, a 56-year-old stay-at-home wife. My kids are grown and out of the house now. So it's just me, my husband, and my in-laws living together. Thankfully, I have a good relationship with them, which is nice since I lost my own parents when I was young. With the kids gone, my husband and I are finally enjoying some freedom from parenting duties. When my husband and I tied the knot, we knew we'd eventually share a home with his parents. However, my mother-in-law, who had a rough time with her own mother-in-law, had her house turned into a two-family home for us. Even though we live under the same roof, we each have our own space, which has probably helped our relationship flourish. While my husband is at work during the day, I'd often hang out with my in-laws. One day, while my father-in-law was busy with farm chores, I was fixing lunch in the kitchen, planning for us to enjoy it outside. Suddenly, a call came from one of my father-in-law's farming buddies, informing us that he had fallen and broken a bone. He had already been rushed to the family doctor in a pickup truck. My mother-in-law and I abandoned the food and hurried to the hospital. When we got there, emergency surgery was in progress. Despite seeming healthy, my father-in-law was in his 80s, so bouncing back from a fracture wouldn't be easy. The doctors warned us to brace for the worst, possibly even needing a wheelchair. So that's what they meant. As long as he pulls through, that's all that matters. I'll be there to support him, I vowed. We sat anxiously, hearts heavy with prayers, as the surgery dragged on. By the time my husband finished work and joined us, the surgery was over, and we breathed a collective sigh of relief seeing my father-in-law peacefully sleeping in his hospital room, free of any major complications. We decided to rally around him together from then on. But our hopes were dashed when, just a month later, my father-in-law passed away suddenly. His age had left him vulnerable, and he succumbed to an infection that took hold after the surgery. With many of his friends and family also elderly, we hesitated to burden them with news of the wake and funeral. After much discussion, we settled on a private family funeral. Yet even in death, there were unresolved tensions. What about my sister-in-law? I raised the question to my mother-in-law and husband, both wearing expressions of disapproval, likely remembering her troubled marriage, which they had vehemently opposed. While my husband didn't share their strong opposition, he couldn't fully embrace the idea either. This created a strain, causing their relationship with their daughter to become distant. Still, she was their flesh and blood. Shouldn't she have the chance to bid her final farewell? Eventually, they relented, agreeing that if we could reach her, she could attend. But our attempts to contact her proved futile, and the funeral proceeded without her presence. It's just the way things are with her. It's fate. Don't dwell on it, Martha. My mother-in-law comforted me, gently patting my shoulder as we made our way home from the crematorium with my father-in-law's ashes. His sudden passing left us all reeling, without any mental preparation for the funeral and cremation process. As we clasped his ashes and lit incense, the days that followed were filled with a sense of emptiness. It's easier when my husband is here. We can lean on each other. But when he's at work, the silence becomes unbearable. So I find solace in my mother-in-law's company. I know she's enduring even greater pain and sorrow than I am. After all, she lost the husband she'd been with for so many years in the blink of an eye. Even if it's just a facade, I make an effort to maintain a cheerful demeanor around her, I admitted. But my mother-in-law surprised me with her pragmatism. I had planned to keep things this way until the 49th day. However, yes, we can go through his belongings later. But I'm already over 80. You look remarkably young for your age, mother-in-law. Rarely ill, she'd often mention her only hospitalization being childbirth, indicating her robust health. Essentially, she assured us not to worry about her. You're very kind, Martha. But while I'm still mobile, I'd like to organize our things, including his, she insisted. I understand the sentiment of wanting to preserve important memories, like your father-in-law's belongings. Just let me know if you need assistance, I offered. She promptly asked for help retrieving items out of her reach. As we sifted through old photos of my father-in-law, she fondly recalled their youth, sharing tales of their adventures. I listened attentively, nodding along. When the phone rang, my mother-in-law, who didn't own a smartphone, relied on the landline for communication. I wonder who that could be. Only a few close friends knew our situation, and I thought they might avoid calling once they knew. But it might be urgent. I'll answer it. Considering her difficulty in moving, I decided to answer the phone myself rather than inconvenience her. I quickly reached for the receiver near the entrance, greeted by a polite voice I didn't recognize, introducing himself as my sister-in-law's husband. However, I had never crossed paths with him before, leaving me uncertain if he truly was who he claimed to be. As I listened, pondering if this was a new scam targeting the elderly, he broached the topic. I want to discuss the home renovation for caregiving. My father-in-law had already passed away, so why mention caregiving renovations now? Could he have mistaken my mother-in-law's situation? But she wasn't in need of such extensive care. Excuse me? Are you certain you've dialed the right number? This is my wife's family home, isn't it? The man, supposedly my sister-in-law's husband, referenced her maiden name, which indeed matched my husband's family. There was no mistaking this as their residence. Furthermore, his mention of my sister-in-law's name confirmed his authenticity. Yes, the person you mentioned is indeed my husband's sister. Thank you for your understanding. Given the difficulties our family has faced due to our troubled marriage, I feared I had made a negative impression once again. Although I wasn't privy to why my in-laws vehemently opposed my sister-in-law's marriage, this man didn't give off any negative vibes. On the contrary, he appeared genuinely humble and sincere. According to him, he had heard about the estimated $30,000 needed for caregiving renovations and was determined to make amends for the trouble he had caused. He assured us he intended to fulfill the payment, but needed an extension due to difficulty in gathering the funds by the deadline. It's awkward to have him explain everything before divulging this, but his earnestness made me falter. Thank you for your courtesy. Regarding the extension, please give me a moment. When did you learn about the caregiving renovation? My father-in-law was in good health and actively engaged in agriculture until recently. So there was no need for caregiving renovations at all. Past tense. Yes, my father-in-law passed away. We just concluded his funeral and cremation. I understand. I could almost sense his panic on the other end of the line. He must have been bewildered by the disparity between what his wife had relayed and the truth I presented. It simply didn't add up for him. Gradually, he confessed to having caused considerable distress to my in-laws. When he married into the family, he believed his wife's assertion that her father required care, and he aimed to offer financial aid as a gesture of apology for the inconvenience he had caused. He recounted this to me, seemingly sincere in his intentions. I probed how the notion of my father-in-law needing care had arisen. It emerged a few years back. Initially, he appeared to send a fixed sum each month to contribute to caregiving expenses. However, it became apparent that neither my father-in-law nor mother-in-law were aware of such arrangements. Had they known, my mother-in-law would have surely invited him to the funeral. He claimed her mother had expressed gratitude and that it had been helpful, leading me to believe I was gradually being forgiven. If you were truly forgiven, wouldn't she communicate with you? That's a valid point. Moreover, the amount of money sent annually seemed to be increasing. He had been sending more each month, assuming we had requested additional support, a request we had no memory of making. So none of this money reached you? As I confirmed, I sensed his growing frustration. It was challenging for me to articulate while also absorbing the information. I speculated that perhaps my sister-in-law. Well, I couldn't outright say you're being deceived. But he interjected. You don't need to tiptoe around it. I'm being deceived, aren't I? Unable to confirm or deny, I remained silent. He likely interpreted my silence as confirmation. seeking guidance on how to proceed if indeed being deceived. He turned to me. While it wasn't my place to advise, I couldn't bear to abandon my sister-in-law, my husband's sibling. Despite our estrangement, I assured him we would discuss the matter and get back to him later. And with that, our conversation concluded for the day. Upon returning to my mother-in-law, she remarked, "That was quite the lengthy call. Was it one of those persistent salespeople? You know, you should just hang up on them." She assumed it was a pushy sales call. "No, it was someone claiming to be my sister-in-law's husband," I replied, sharing the details of the conversation with her. Anger simmered beneath her calm facade as she listened, erupting further upon hearing the entirety of it. What kind of person is she, using her father as an excuse to extort money from her husband? My mother-in-law's hands trembled with fury. It wasn't the first time my sister-in-law had displayed financial irresponsibility, often splurging on luxury items she couldn't afford with her allowance or part-time job earnings. Her behavior seemed suspicious. When she decided to marry, her partner was a man of considerable wealth, which led her parents to vehemently oppose the union. Their opposition wasn't for the sake of my sister-in-law, but rather for her partner's well-being. We then agreed to wait at the culprit's residence with her husband for her eventual return. It had been so long since I last laid eyes on my sister-in-law. When she first introduced her then boyfriend, now husband, to her parents and brother with marriage intentions, there was quite a stir. However, as I wasn't yet formally part of the family, I wasn't present for the commotion. Hence, this would mark my initial encounter with my sister-in-law's spouse. As I had sensed during our phone conversation, he appeared genuinely sincere with a pleasant demeanor. Despite rumors of his substantial income, he didn't seem to lead an extravagant lifestyle. Instead, he appeared to opt for a more modest existence. However, if one of the reasons behind this modesty stemmed from my sister-in-law's deceit, it undoubtedly evoked a complex mix of emotions. Meeting my sister-in-law again after many years, her unexpected encounter with her mother at home left her visibly stunned, her eyes widening in disbelief as she stood frozen in place. The image I had of my sister-in-law was one of someone with a penchant for flashy things. However, the woman before me now appeared excessively ostentatious, lacking any sense of refinement, which was somewhat disheartening to witness. The three of us had agreed beforehand to play along with my sister-in-law's charade. Initially, we opted not to address her deceit directly. "It's been quite some time. I'm glad to see you're doing well," I greeted her with warmth. Caught off guard by the unexpected kindness, my sister-in-law stuttered in response to her mother, perhaps fearing her lies had been exposed, and she would face reprimand. "I've been wanting to see you again after all these years. How have you been?" We chose not to divulge the truth about her father's passing and upheld the pretense that he was still alive. I offered my apologies for not keeping in touch and exchanged pleasantries accordingly. Humbly, my sister-in-law expressed relief that her mother seemed healthy and admitted to worrying about her. However, conspicuously absent from her remarks was any mention of her father. We were keen to avoid any discussion that might inadvertently reveal the truth about her father's condition or the issue of caregiving expenses. It appeared that my husband and she had crossed paths before, yet her deception remained undetected. Perhaps she believed she could continue her charade without consequence. "Your mom seems pleased. It looks like you two are doing well together," remarked my mother-in-law. She was hopeful that her daughter would mend her ways and gradually start supporting her husband. The strategy was to shower her with praise in the hopes of prompting a change of heart. Somehow, my sister-in-law went a step too far, assuring my mother-in-law that she would provide caregiving support if needed and even insisted not to worry about finances. It's astonishing she could make such promises in front of her husband, who had been supporting her with good intentions. My heart went out to him as he listened to it all, I lamented. Expressing our gratitude, we took our leave that day. Judging from her actions, it seemed probable that my sister-in-law had been diverting the money she requested for her own use. Uncertain of where the hefty sum of $30,000 had disappeared to, we opted to hire a private investigator to delve into her financial affairs. The monthly caregiving funds, totaling several $1,000s, were evidently being redirected for her personal benefit. However, what unfolded was a shocking revelation. She was deeply entangled with a favored club host, lavishing him with financial support in a bid to elevate his status. Her extravagant spending included purchasing costly bottles and accumulating debts she couldn't settle each month. As the host faced mounting pressure to settle his unpaid bills, amounting to $30,000, my sister-in-law's husband was incensed, realizing he could no longer turn a blind eye. He meticulously orchestrated his plans while she was away on a trip with her preferred host, oblivious to the unfolding events. Upon returning home a few days later, she was met with a stark reality. Her house was devoid of furniture or personal belongings, leaving her in a state of panic, frantically attempting to reach her husband to no avail. She eventually contacted me in distress. Initially hysterical, she immediately quieted down when I nonchalantly inquired about her trip with the club host. Unable to question how I was aware of her actions without admitting guilt, she found herself at a loss for words. Now it was my turn to confront her, leaving no room for rebuttal. Your deception hasn't gone unnoticed. You've betrayed not only your mother and husband, but also shattered any trust others may have had in you. Furthermore, the father-in-law you exploited as an excuse has passed away. It wasn't entirely her fault for being unaware of her father's passing, but using his supposed care as a pretext to solicit money was unquestionably wrong. I made it clear that her ex-husband was also privy to the truth, and upon realizing she had been abandoned, she erupted into a fit of screams over the phone, resembling a person unhinged. Refusing to engage with her ex-husband and unwilling to burden my elderly mother-in-law further, I volunteered to act as an intermediary with my sister-in-law. Despite her continued protests over the phone, she evoked pity in a way, oblivious to her father's demise and exploiting him as a means to an end. Though she might harbor regrets, it was too late for remorse. I delivered one final message to her. Your ex-husband intends to demand full repayment for the money you squandered on the host. You'll need to find a way to settle the $30,000 debt on your own. Subsequently, she received legal documents from a lawyer. Despite her request to speak with her husband, he remained resolute, unable to stomach any interaction with his ex-wife, even for legal proceedings. With no room for negotiation, my sister-in-law was left to eke out a modest living while grappling with the weight of her debts. Naturally timid, she lived in perpetual fear of the lawyer's notices and the unwelcome visits from debt collectors. As for us, we resumed our ordinary lives. While it took some time to sift through my father-in-law's belongings, we resolved to move forward as a family, including his share. Recently, my mother-in-law has begun showing signs of decline, hinting that the day she'll require care may be nearing. Since we couldn't do much for my father-in-law, my husband, and I pledged to do our utmost for my mother-in-law. My older brother, a 30-year-old male, pursued higher education and later worked as an accountant in the city. Meanwhile, I, a 27-year-old male, started working for my dad as a plumber at the age of 15. I attended college to obtain qualifications in plumbing and gas. Around the time the pandemic began, my brother moved back from the city and joined my dad, who was 55 years old at the time, in our family plumbing business. Unfortunately, my dad's health had deteriorated due to asbestosis, rendering him unable to work effectively. Despite his declining health, he continued to work alongside me on Fridays, even though I had taken over the business operations for the past 2 years. During the pandemic, we faced challenges initially, but we managed to bounce back. We expanded our business, now operating 50 vans, each with one qualified and one trainee plumber. However, last month, my dad announced his decision to step down from the business due to his health. To my dismay, he handed over the business to my brother and asked me to relinquish my role as the acting CEO. This decision deeply upset me, especially considering my long-standing dedication to the business. In the beginning, it was just my dad and me, as my brother had no interest in joining the family business, dismissing it as unworthy of his time. Now he was suddenly the boss, despite lacking knowledge of our trade. I confronted my dad about his choice, but he justified it by pointing out my brother's family responsibilities and university education. Many of our employees were also unhappy with this decision, expressing their intention to leave if I did. Faced with this situation, I decided to leave the family business and start my own. Despite the hurtful messages and criticisms I received, I expressed gratitude to those who supported me. My plan was to reach out to our large clients, hoping to take over projects that had been postponed due to the pandemic. I also had the support of 20 colleagues willing to work with me. With my savings from the past 12 years, I believed I had enough to start my own business and stand on my own feet. Despite the challenges, I was determined to make my new venture successful, although I couldn't help feeling guilty about competing with my family. You shouldn't have to endure this injustice. They not only took the business away from you, but also from all the loyal employees who don't want to work under an inexperienced CEO. It's not just about you, Hall. It's about everyone affected by this decision. Your father could have split the business 50-50, with your brother handling the accounting side and you managing production. I would suggest offering this solution to your father. If he refuses, I would advise cutting all contact and blocking relatives. In your shoes, I would start my own business and never look back. Your brother turned his back on the family business while you poured your heart and soul into building it. Honestly, I thought your brother's return would unite us all into one big family company. It's heartbreaking that your father allowed this to happen, especially the significant pay cut you had to endure. This clearly shows how he values you compared to your brother. I am truly sorry for what you're going through. I hope you find the strength to run your brother's business out of the market. Thank you for your support. The most difficult part is that my brother agreed to the pay cut. I was still earning a decent wage, but it felt like a betrayal. I'd always believed my father would divide the business between us, not leave me on the sidelines after everything I did to build it. Now for an update. I want to make it clear that I don't intend to start a business with the purpose of destroying my brother. Despite my anger, I've invested almost 13 years in this business, and I don't want to see anyone lose their job or witness the downfall of the company. It's currently 5 a.m. in England, and your support has been invaluable. I plan to talk to my father around 8 a.m. I'll take him out for breakfast to have an honest conversation. I'm not sure if I'll get the answers I seek, but I love my family and want my future kids to know them. I'll update you all after today's events. Second update. As I mentioned in one of the comments, I believe my family has found my post, and they confirmed it this morning when I arrived at my parents' house. My mom greeted me with tear-streaked eyes, and my dad and I went out for breakfast to talk. He didn't utter a word during the drive there. Upon our arrival, and then again on the way back, he asked if we could pull over to talk. It was the first time I had ever seen my dad cry. When I confronted him, asking why he had done this to me, he confessed he didn't know. I pressed him, and he finally revealed that he felt he owed it to my brother for not being there for him as much as he was for me during our upbringing. There were moments my brother needed him, but we were always working. I couldn't fathom it. After 12 years of relentless dedication, this was his justification. I told my father that I had invested half my life working for the business, and now he was sidelining me just because my brother had returned. It hurt me in ways I couldn't express. To my surprise, he wasn't angry when he discovered the post I had shared. Instead, he seemed remorseful. He admitted that my mother was devastated after reading the comments about how badly they had treated me. She believed I would never talk to them again. My dad acknowledged that he should have split the business between us, realizing that it would require both of us to keep progressing. He apologized for never expressing how proud he was of everything I had achieved. He understood my brother would never agree to a 50-50 arrangement. He pleaded for me to return, saying my brother would need me, but I replied that it was no longer my concern. I tried to make it work for 3 weeks after my demotion and pay cut, but my brother refused to listen, dismissing my expertise. So I left. My dad broke down, confessing that he had torn the family apart and regretted what he had done. I couldn't fathom why it took him so long to realize my value in the company. In the third update, I had several successful Zoom calls with clients, and they informed me they would be sending proposals for upcoming work. Fortunately, the start dates didn't clash, a concern that had weighed heavily on my mind. 3 of my experienced colleagues had left my previous workplace and chose to join me voluntarily, an affirmation that touched me deeply. At this point, I had everything I needed to start my new business, 3 vans, and the tools I had amassed over the years. Then my father called and invited me over for dinner. Uncertain but hopeful, I accepted, thinking it might be a step in the right direction. When I arrived, my entire family was present. The atmosphere was tense. My mother avoided eye contact, and my brother acted as if I didn't exist. My dad asked both my brother and me to join him in his office. He began questioning when I would return to the company, stating that they needed me back early Monday morning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them both that I wouldn't be returning, that I had started my own business. I questioned my brother, asking what he meant by we, considering he was the one who had been given the business. My brother lost his temper, demanding to know why I would leave if I truly cared about the company. I didn't hold back, expressing my frustration. I reminded him that I had dedicated 12 years of my life to make the company successful, just like him. Unlike him, I didn't seek all the glory, and I wouldn't allow myself to be treated poorly. I told him to leave so I could talk to Dad. I confronted my father, asking him about his apology earlier in the day and why he expected me to return despite everything. He couldn't meet my gaze. I said my goodbyes to my cousins, nieces, and nephews and walked out. I spent about 3 hours writing, finding solace before returning here to share my thoughts. I want to express my gratitude to everyone for the personal messages, comments, rewards, and all the encouraging words. I'll try to respond to everyone, but I'm exhausted and will likely fall asleep. In the 4th update, it's been a while since I last shared. I've had a lot going on in the past few weeks. The new business is thriving. We have plenty of work and are making good money. At the year's end, I plan to expand, and I couldn't be happier about that. My fiancé and I are overjoyed. She's busy planning our dream wedding, although she wants me to wear a suit. I insist on my kilt. Waking up next to her every day brings me immense happiness. She's been my rock through everything. Regarding my family, my father and brother still refuse to talk to me. They declared they won't attend our wedding, even though they haven't been invited. When mother contacts my fiancé, asking about wedding details but won't talk to me. On the brighter side, my fiancé's family has been incredible, helping with the lawsuits, assisting with wedding preparations, and much more. I am deeply thankful for their support. Other members of my family have backed off, apologized, and expressed a desire to make amends for the hurtful things that were said. My fiancé and I have decided to have our wedding in November. After we're married, we plan to try for children. We're both excited about becoming parents. The next story revolves around my business and the decision not to split control equally between my children. I'm a 65-year-old electrician from Germany, looking forward to settling down, traveling with my wife, and spoiling our grandchildren for the rest of our lives. I have built up a small business with 23 employees. My son, Alexander, who is 36 years old, will take control of it. I also have 2 daughters whom I am proud of. Laura, 34, has a master's degree in biochemistry, and Marie, 30, is a middle school teacher in mathematics and sports. Recently, I shared my plan of family gathering. Laura was supportive, but Marie accused me of favoritism, which I denied. I explained that Alexander had worked with me for 17 years, starting as a trainee and eventually earning his master's license as an electrician. He has demonstrated passion, dedication, and leadership, training 7 of our employees along the way. My daughters were offered opportunities to work with me during school holidays, but they pursued their own careers, which my wife and I supported financially and emotionally. I sought opinions on Reddit, asking if I was in the wrong. Most responses were in favor of my decision to leave the business to Alexander. People pointed out that hard work should be rewarded, emphasizing that he had invested his time and energy in the business and had helped make it successful. They agreed that leaving the business to him was a way to ensure stability for our employees and their families. Additionally, they acknowledged that it was my business and my money, and I had the right to decide who should inherit it. German law might have different views, but the consensus was that my choice was justifiable. In this situation, it's crucial for your uncle and cousins to consult a lawyer, as there might be legal costs involved in compensating his other children when he decides to pass the company to only one child. It's not being in a hole, it's just practical business sense. Marie may lack experience in this industry or running a business, which makes your son, Alexander, the most qualified candidate, given his 17 years of dedicated work with you. Marie's bitterness appears to stem more from Alexander's close relationship with you than from the handover of the business. It's worth considering that both Marie and Alexander had equal opportunities. They could have chosen to pursue a career as an electrician, but only Alexander followed through. It's unfair for Marie to resent the situation based on her own choices. As for your last story, about your inheritance, you're not the whole for not splitting your inheritance equally with your cousins. Your paternal grandmas will specify the distribution of her money among her grandchildren, not anticipating the number of children your dad and uncle would have. Your parents are right in asserting that it's your money, and you should be the one to decide how to handle it after gaining access to it. The accusations of selfishness are unwarranted, especially considering the unique circumstances that led to the uneven distribution. Your upbringing and your parents' financial decisions are entirely unrelated to the situation at hand. I had to buy my own car, while my cousins had theirs bought for them by their parents. My dad's aunt constantly fueled my uncle's belief that my dad was the favorite child, which left my uncle resentful. He now uses the fact that I'm receiving more money to support that idea. I refuse to split the money because it's rightfully mine. The inheritance was meant for the children of my dad, and it's not my fault that my parents had only one child. My parents taught me financial responsibility, and I plan to put most of the money into a lifetime ISA. I intend to use some of it to travel after university and invest the rest wisely. I'm not planning on squandering it all in one go. Furthermore, Connor and Olivia's shares are substantial, far more than most people inherit and more than many have access to in their early 20s. Connor has already spent most of his inheritance on partying, traveling, and cars, so I don't see why I should have to compensate for his choices. Regarding the messages I've received, I want to clarify that my grandma did not exclude my dad and uncle. She only left the money from her various bank accounts to the grandchildren. Her other assets, such as property, jewelry, art collection, and investments, were divided between them. To those who say I'm being selfish, I firmly believe that my decision aligns with my grandma's wishes. Imagine if the roles were reversed. Would they willingly share their inheritance? I don't think so. This is a fair, but not equal, situation. My grandmother was fair by splitting the money 50-50 between her son's descendants. It's their entitlement and not a matter of greed. Anyone questioning it can express their concerns at her grave. My father, aged 52, and I, at 25, reside in my mother's ancestral house, an inheritance I received when she passed away from cancer when I was 16. I share the space with my 3-year-old Cocker Spaniel, Moxie. Recently, my father surprised me by marrying his high school sweetheart, Steph, 51, whom he had been in contact with for almost 2 years. They swiftly moved into the house a week after their small wedding, a ceremony to which I was not invited, unaware of their relationship. Steph, along with her twin stepdaughters, Lizzie and Lexi, fake names, both 20, and their two chihuahuas, Gucci and Herms, relocated to our home. The twins attend a nearby state college, and my father proposed that they live with us to save on expenses, to which I reluctantly agreed, thinking the spacious 7-bedroom house could accommodate all of us. However, complications arose. Firstly, Steph demanded my room, citing the need for space for her luxury items. I firmly refused, asserting my long-standing claim to the room. A compromise was reached wherein my father offered his closet space to her. Secondly, the twins had a habit of entering rooms without knocking, causing me considerable embarrassment during a work meeting when Lexi, wearing a bikini, barged into my office. Furthermore, their untrained dogs left messes around the house, endangering Moxie, who was often harassed by them. I found her injured one day, prompting my concern for her safety. To aggravate matters, family photos, including those of my grandparents, great-grandparents, my mother's family, and myself, were repeatedly moved without my consent. In a recent incident, Steph replaced these pictures with her own, causing a heated argument between us. She insisted on setting house rules, claiming it was her domain, implying I lacked proper upbringing due to my mother's absence. I could not tolerate her disrespect in my own home. Furious, I confronted her, asserting my ownership of the house, and told her unequivocally that if she and her twins refused to respect my boundaries, they could pack their belongings and leave. I reminded her, "Lady, you are living under my roof," affirming my authority in the situation. "This house is my inheritance from my mother, and at this moment, you, your twins, and your dogs are trespassing. Get out before I call the cops." When my father returned home early that day after Steph told him what transpired, I explained my perspective. It was mentioned that they were still adjusting to the house, and the move had been challenging for them. I shared all the issues I had been facing, but my father insisted that things would improve if we gave them time. I had endured their behavior and reached my limit. I firmly stated that enough was enough. He continued to defend them, so I made a decision. I told him he could either move out with them or stay, but he had until the end of the week to make his choice. Did I do the right thing by forcing my dad to choose between me and his new family? I had given them a chance, but disrespecting my mother's memory in the house where we both grew up was my breaking point. The top comments before reading the updates were overwhelmingly supportive of my decision. "Definitely yes, good for you." Literally my first thought, nodding like yes. "Good, they sound terrible." "Girl, you did what you had to do, and I would 100% do the exact same thing. Your father, on the other hand, needs to grow some spine. It seems like she's got him wrapped around her fingers. I doubt it was even his idea to get married without inviting you. If he ends up choosing them, just cut them out, though no contact. You don't need that kind of toxicity in your life. Also, make sure he can't contest your inheritance regarding the house, just so they can stay there. You know, people these days. I hope it turns out in your favor. Don't put the secret wedding on the wife. Daddy Dearest dated for 2 years, hiding it so hard that OP had no clue whatsoever. Even if this was her idea, Daddy Dearest was totally in support of it. The amount of entitlement your father's wife and stepdaughters have is absurd. I am so glad you kicked them out. As far as your dad, his behavior is also pretty terrible. The whole thing of, 'Whoops, I got married, didn't tell you, and oh, by the way, can my new family move in?' He is not showing any courtesy, respect, and honesty. I wouldn't be surprised if the wedding was the stepmom's idea, especially not inviting the daughter of the man you're marrying. Like, what is that? Just a quick update. I've read through all your comments, and I want to express my gratitude for your support. It means a lot to me. I realize it might seem like I'm a pushover, and maybe I am. I just prefer avoiding confrontation and arguments. I'm not the type to engage in fights with someone. I'd taken your advice and decided to change the locks around the house. Unfortunately, the gate on the property is old and rusted, and it's been open for who knows how long. I can't do much about it at the moment. I've contacted the same lawyer who handled my mom's will to review if there are any loopholes or chances that my dad could contest it. I'll be meeting with her in a couple of hours. About my dad, he's a good man. He's worked hard to provide for me and my needs after my mom died. He's never asked me to tap into my money to help with living expenses, etc. He earns a decent amount as an engineer, around 6 figures. So I don't think he's after my money, but I could be wrong. I think he's just blindsided by the fact that someone still finds him attractive at his age. It didn't help that it was his high school sweetheart. I confronted him about his impromptu wedding and how he kept things from me. He said he didn't know how I would react if I knew he was dating his ex-girlfriend before he met and admired my mom. I was upset, but I eventually got over it since he seemed happy having her around. I don't know the full story between them or if there's any bad blood between her and my mom to make her act out and disrespect her. Steph and her daughters are staying somewhere in town now. Frankly, I don't care to find out where. They have the means to take care of themselves, and if they run out, they can always sell their luxury bags. They seem to have so many that they require a whole closet just to store them. For those wondering about my relatives, my mom was an only child, and my grandparents left everything to her. When my mom passed away, I inherited most of what she had, and she also left some to my dad. My grandparents on my dad's side live about 6 hours away with my uncles and cousins. So it's just me, my dad, and Moxie here. Speaking of Moxie, she's doing well. She seems happier and enjoys the quietness around the house. I'll update again as soon as I can. But once again, thank you all for your support. It sounds like I'm safe, and I appreciate your reassurance that kicking them out was the right thing to do. I've taken your suggestion to heart and will be sure to keep anything sentimental or valuable to me locked up, just in case she comes back and tries to destroy some of my pictures, etc. This is indeed a great suggestion. In addition to changing the locks, I should document and keep records of everything with monetary and sentimental value. Keeping a video record, photographs, a ledger, or a spreadsheet of my belongings is a wise move to ensure their protection. As for the size of my property, it has indeed been in the family for generations. It's filled with a lot of history and sentimental value, making it all the more important to safeguard. You're right. There's nothing wrong with being kind. But sometimes you do have to toughen up and find your strength, which is precisely what I did. I plan to keep my valuables somewhere safe until I'm absolutely certain they are out of my life. If things turn sour, I may consider renting out rooms, but I'll make sure to have a proper lease agreement in place. You made a good point about evaluating my relationship with my dad. It is perplexing that he didn't tell me about his dating and marriage plans, but had no qualms about moving them into my house. It seems that he cares more about her than me, which is disappointing. I did have a conversation with my dad about his impromptu wedding and why he kept it from me. He claimed he was unsure how I'd react if I knew he was dating his ex-girlfriend before he met and married my mom. However, it does seem like he was more concerned about upsetting me over the dating part rather than moving a secret family into my home. In truth, my dad's actions reflect that he doesn't truly care about how difficult this situation has been for me. It's as if he values his wife and her daughter's feelings more than mine. I appreciate your perspective and insights. Now, here's the second update. I spoke with my mother's previous lawyer, Amy, a fake name, about the issue on Saturday and inquired if there was a way to contest the will. Amy showed me the documents, indicating that my dad and I had both signed agreements stating that we were in accord with what was left to us and that we wouldn't contest it in the future. She also advised giving them a 30-day notice to find a new place and move out to avoid legal troubles related to the inheritance issue. So, the inheritance matter has been resolved. On Saturday night, I was supposed to have dinner with just my dad, but apparently, a private discussion between a father and daughter became a family affair with Steph and the twins present. To cut short the misery, I informed them that I had consulted Amy regarding the house and other legal matters, and that they had 30 days to find a new place and move out. Steph tried to object, but I shut her down, suggesting that we all go to family therapy and take some time to get to know each other. I rolled my eyes at the mere thought. I firmly stated that it had been months since they moved in, yet they hadn't made any effort to be a family unless they needed something. I had had enough, so I asked my dad if he was going with them or staying, indicating that his decision would determine which items he could take with him. He seemed confused, asking if I was kicking him out. I clarified that I wasn't, but wherever he decided to go, he would have to manage on his own. However, I made it clear that I wouldn't maintain contact if he chose to leave. Steph asked why I was evicting him from his own house, to which I replied that I inherited the house from my mother. There seemed to be a misunderstanding on their part, particularly with Lexi, who argued that it would be difficult to move since they were in the midst of finishing the spring semester and finals were just a few weeks away. I simply smiled and suggested they find a new place swiftly. After that, I left the conversation. On Easter Sunday, I invited my boyfriend, his family, and my two best friends over to celebrate. My dad had been calling me, and my brother had been answering his calls, inviting me to spend the day with them. However, as far as I'm concerned, the only family I recognize now are my two best friends, my boyfriend, and his family. It was a wonderful Sunday, filled with egg hunting, games, and a grand dinner, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Everything felt just right. Currently, I'm in the process of meticulously documenting every item in the house worth over $500. I had some people over to assist with this task. All the locks have been changed, and I've only given a copy to my boyfriend. No need to worry about my dad asking him for a key since my dad doesn't approve of him, given his middle-class background. I've also taken steps to enhance security by hiring professionals to install a security system around the house and property. Additionally, I have a meeting scheduled with someone to discuss the fences and gates. I haven't tapped into the funds my mom left behind, as I've been using them for college tuition, dorm expenses, and other needs. However, given the urgency of the situation, I believe it's time to access those funds. All the family pictures and portraits are currently in storage, and other smaller valuables are stored in a safety deposit box. Important documents are kept in a water and fireproof safe that requires both a key and a pin to open, and it's situated in my room. I'm taking every precaution and advice that you've provided in the comments on my previous post. Thank you for your valuable suggestions. So, for now, that's the update. I'm not entirely sure why my dad is choosing to be with them rather than me, his own flesh and blood. I've come to accept that, for some unknown or unexplainable reason, they are more important to him. It's challenging, as he's the only family I have left here, and I'm not particularly close to his side of the family. However, once they move out, I plan to cut contact with him. He's a grown man and can decide what he wants to do with his life. I appreciate all the support and well wishes. Thank you for your encouragement. You're doing a great job, and it's essential not to let your dad manipulate you or lie to get his way. He made his choice, and you shouldn't allow him to weasel his way back into your life. Don't be surprised if some emergency or crisis comes up in the future, as that's a common tactic some families use to regain access. Stay strong and true to your decisions. I cut ties with them 3 years ago. In the past month alone, there have been relentless attempts to drag me back into their chaos. First, there was the pressure to get tested for some unspecified issue when my grandpa needed blood due to a rare problem. Then my grandma had a minor stroke with no lasting damage, but it was blown out of proportion. My sister wanted a divorce, and my parents were unhelpful, leaving me to handle the emotional fallout alone. Now my mom is bombarding me with frantic voicemails about my sister needing support, all while my grandpa battles pneumonia or congestive heart failure. He's 19, his health is deteriorating, and I feel helpless. They paint me as a heartless monster for not caring, but every manufactured crisis has made me numb. They create emergencies, ensuring things can never get better, providing an excuse to stay in my life. I'm doing my best to document everything. You're absolutely right. These people will invent insane reasons to crawl back into my life. Mom might manipulate Dad's decisions by withholding intimacy, forcing him to choose her over me. It's sad how some people prioritize their desires over their children's well-being. I agree. It's time for me to focus my energy on my boyfriend and his family. My dad's blindness to my feelings before making major decisions is disappointing. While I'm an adult, if he's my only family, one would think he'd make wiser choices. I've seen worse situations on various platforms, like husbands leaving their wives for mistresses, so I should be able to handle this. I just hope my boyfriend isn't taking advantage of me. I should consider a prenuptial agreement to safeguard my interests. It's become apparent that she assumed my dad's house was her own, which is why she asked me to give up my room for her convenience. She underestimated my resolve, but it was a crafty move. Kudos to her. But this situation feels like a twisted version of Cinderella, where everything goes right for her, but not for the wicked stepmother and stepsisters. Boycotting contact after my dad moves his new family out seems necessary. He married her without considering my feelings, and he should have provided them with their own place from the start. Perhaps that could have salvaged our relationship. If he genuinely wanted to be a father to me, he should have stood up for me and his late wife against his new family's disrespectful behavior. Instead, he's shifting the burden onto me, and that's not how a parent should act.
Welcome back. I don't know what to do. I want to ask my boyfriend to marry me, but I need advice. We've been dating for 5 years. Jake is the nicest guy I've ever met. Even though he's really busy, he always puts me first. Whenever I thought he couldn't show me more love, he went above and beyond to make me feel special. But he still hasn't proposed. I'm confused. If he loves me this much, why hasn't he proposed? My friends, who didn't feel as loved as I did, were getting married, and I was left waiting. I was running out of time, but one Friday, he picked me up as usual, looking cheerful and excited. I thought that day would be when he proposed, but to my disappointment, he told me that his younger brother had set a wedding date for the next month. I felt awful because it seemed like Jake didn't see me as someone he wanted to marry. He was financially stable and had his own place. What more did he need? His excitement was because he was going to be the best man and give a speech on that day. I couldn't conceal my disappointment, so I called my best friend Sami, but she didn't answer. Feeling down, I called my aunt for comfort. She liked Jake, but thought he wasn't ready for marriage, suggesting I consider other options. I blame her for the advice that led to my actions with Alan. I meet Alan outside the venue of Jake's brother's wedding. I had to step out because I couldn't bear the applause and sweet talk for the newlyweds, especially witnessing Jake happily teasing the bride and groom. I realized that if I stayed there, I might go talk to him. I didn't notice Alan right away because I was still upset. Then someone came up to me and asked if I wasn't a fan of weddings. The question surprised me, and I laughed. I looked at him with curiosity. He was well-dressed and good-looking. He introduced himself, and I did the same. He told me he thought I was too beautiful to wear a frown, and I blushed. He said he thought I was too beautiful to have a frown on my face, and I blushed. We continued talking, and I found myself captivated by him. We swapped contact information, and then I went back inside. I can't say if it was because of his wonderfully expressed compliments or because I was upset with Jake. But I caught myself thinking about Alan. So when my aunt asked about the wedding, I ended up telling her about Alan instead. She was excited and suggested that I keep in touch with him. I asked her what would happen with Jake, and she said it didn't matter if neither of them knew about each other. I told my best friend about it, and she laughed, saying I was close to getting married, but still interested in someone else. I asked her where the ring on my finger was. In the following days, Alan and I chatted on the phone. He was charming, and I found myself really liking him. We see each other 2 times in a week. It was simple to plan because Jake was really busy with work and didn't have much time for me. Instead, he sent bouquets of flowers. When Alan said he wanted a real relationship and was thinking about settling down soon, I felt so excited that it felt like my insides were going to burst. It was as if our stars aligned. The day he officially asked me to be his girlfriend was the first time we got close physically. Later, I cried because I felt guilty. I had never cheated on Jake before, but I didn't want to be single forever. I called my aunt and poured out my heart to her. She suggested that I wait until I was certain Alan was about to propose before breaking up with Jake. So, I kept going in my relationship with Alan, even though it felt both good and wrong. The guilt made me stay away from Jake, even when he wanted to see me. I knew that if I got too close to him, I would crumble and confess everything to him. Eventually, he became persistent about seeing me and asked why I was avoiding him. I didn't have a real reason, so I told him it was because my pedicure services were taking up my time. He looked at me with a knowing expression, like he could understand everything about me. I got scared and called my aunt afterward. After Jake left, she told me to be careful. A few days later, Sami called me to let me know that Jake wanted to propose to me and make it a surprise. Jake wasn't sure how to do it, so he asked for Sami's assistance. I felt thankful that she informed me because I realized I needed to break up with Alan before moving forward with this new chapter. I was too afraid to tell him in person, so I sent him a message instead. I thought he might call, so I blocked his number. I went to stay with my aunt just in case he tried to find me at my apartment. Luckily, my roommates didn't know where my aunt lived, so they couldn't tell anyone. On the day Jake proposed, I was incredibly happy, and I almost accidentally revealed that Sami had told me about the surprise. It was just the two of us during the proposal, and it was incredibly beautiful. My 2-carat diamond ring, a gift from Jake, is definitely a keeper. I felt deeply moved when he shared that he waited to propose because he wanted to make sure he was ready to be the best man for my love. However, my actions of avoiding him in the past week made him decide to propose sooner than he had initially planned. I cried tears of both happiness and guilt. We're planning to visit the rest of his family in the upcoming week. Jake's family house was quite large, and from the few times I had visited, I knew that there were always family members coming and going, so I was ready for that. What caught me off guard was seeing Alan there, being introduced as Jake's second cousin who lives in Germany. I was in a daze and didn't even realize my legs were moving until I found myself rushing to the nearest bathroom, away from Jake's and Alan's shocked expressions. I needed to collect myself and figure out what to do. I tried calling my aunt, but I couldn't reach her. So, I called Sami and had to begin explaining everything from the moment I met Alan because she was only aware of our first encounter. Sami expressed disappointment that I hadn't told her earlier, but she urged me to stay composed. She hoped Alan wouldn't say anything right away, so I could leave Jake's house and head straight to her place. That way, we could figure out how to handle the situation and reassure Alan. I agreed with Sami's advice and ended the call. I went outside to talk to Jake and let him know I was feeling nauseous and needed to go home. However, Jake was standing by the door, about to head to the bathroom. He just stared at me as if I was a stranger. I called his name, but he turned away. I hurried after him, but I didn't want to cause a scene, so I kept walking, trying to process his sudden change in demeanor. I took a moment to compose myself and then looked around for Alan. When I couldn't find him, I continued searching for Jake, but he was nowhere to be found. I was puzzled by his behavior. I wondered if Alan had said something to him. I always thought men weren't usually so talkative about personal matters. Could he have heard what I told Sami? I realized my mistake in confiding in Sami while I was at Jake's home. I felt an urgent need to find out if Alan had revealed anything to Jake. Update. Yesterday evening, I went to Jake's house because I had been trying to call him, and he hadn't been picking up. I spoke to his doorman, who informed me that he hadn't returned from work yet. Worried, I rushed to his workplace to catch him before he left, but I couldn't find him there either. I called my aunt to update her because I had already told her what had happened earlier. She advised me to call Alan and ensure he would cooperate, even if it meant offering him closure one last time. I thought it was a good suggestion, so I dialed Alan's number. He answered on the first ring, and I apologized for abruptly cutting off contact. He told me I had some nerve to call him after what I did. He asked me never to call again and cut the call. I rushed to the apartment where Alan was staying and rang the doorbell. Upon opening the door, I was shocked to see Jake, his brother, and a bruised Alan standing in front of me. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran back out. My aunt suggested that I should have come up with an excuse for being at Alan's apartment, even if it meant lying, like saying I was tracking Jake's phone. But I felt that the truth was probably already known. I questioned why I couldn't have been more patient and talked to Jake about his reasons for not proposing instead of rushing into another relationship with Alan. Is there a way for us to get back together? Sami told me a story about a man who gave his wife money even after cheated. We're not married yet, so maybe there's still hope for our relationship. I'm in a dilemma because Jake hasn't said a word to me. He isn't returning my calls, and he hasn't even asked to meet up. How much does he know? Alan blocked my number. I don't know if he did this for sure. What should I do now? Can anyone give me advice on what to do next? Edit. Jake finally called me back and wanted to meet up. Sami gave me advice on what to say and even offered to come along and stay nearby. She was disappointed that I hadn't told her about my situation, but she still wanted things to work out between Jake and me. Jake said he just wanted the engagement ring back. He thought he was the one who didn't deserve me, but now he felt it was the other way around. It turns out Jake overheard some of what I told Sami in the bathroom at his family's house when he was coming to check on me, and it made him very angry. Thinking that Alan had betrayed him, he ended up punching Alan. Fortunately, Jake's brother, who was very close to Alan and the reason Alan had come back in the first place, intervened and prevented a full-blown fight from breaking out. They all gathered at Alan's place, where he explained everything that had happened. Jake also expressed his frustration with me for almost causing a rift between him and his cousin. He said I was a hoe, and I was going to pay for what I did. I tried to beg with him, but he forcibly removed the ring from my finger and ended up bruising me in the process. At this point, I'm unsure about what to do. If I had known Alan was at the wedding, I never would have talked to him in the first place. I don't want to go back to the beginning, guys. Is it possible to get Jake to forgive me? Opinion. You cheated on your caring boyfriend, created chaos with his family, and now you're seeking advice. Here it is. Reflect on your actions, learn from your mistakes, and strive not to create such a huge mess in your relationships in the future.
My mom, Patricia, listened in disbelief as my brother Daniel uttered those words. Mom, if Dad's gone, the company's all mine. She responded calmly, well, obviously, Daniel. Plus, if you do the math, there's supposed to be a sizable inheritance in Plan B with Dad's life insurance. We could live large for a while. It's like a bonus, huh? Got to thank our absent dad. I felt like I was about to explode with anger. What was wrong with these people? This was unforgivable. I couldn't let them have their way. Just as I was about to yell, I got a call from Dad in the hospital. This story goes back a few months. My name is Christopher. I'm a 33-year-old architect working at a design firm. I moved out of my family home and now live alone in a nearby condo. Being single is a little lonely, but I love my job and live a fulfilling life every day. Today is a day off, and I have plans to meet with my dad, James. Ah, Christopher, how have you been? Dad showed up for our meetup with his usual warm smile on his face. Dad, long time no see. Have you lost some weight? Running a business must be tough work. Keeps me busy, but I'm doing well. Let's get going. I occasionally meet up with my dad like this to catch up over a meal. Today, Dad invited me to join him for some volunteer work. We're at a small children's care facility on the outskirts of town. Hello, Mr. Smith. James, Christopher. Hello, and thank you for coming today. We were greeted by the friendly face of the elderly director. Dad and Mr. Smith were chatting away warmly. Turns out, my dad grew up in this facility. After leaving it, he put himself through college and started his own architecture firm. Even without any relatives to rely on, he made it on his own efforts, and I've always admired him for that. On his day off, Dad often invites me to volunteer at the facility with him. Since we both have backgrounds in architecture, we can repair furniture and playground equipment. James, Christopher, you've helped a lot today. After finishing our repairs on beds, chairs, and swings, Mr. Smith thanked us as we were leaving. I felt good about making a difference, and for Dad, visiting Mr. Smith, who's like a father to him, must be important. As we strolled side by side, contemplating where to grab a bite, a sleek black luxury car pulled up next to us. The window rolled down, and out popped my mom. Behind the wheel was my brother Daniel. Well, look who it is, back from the care facility again, Mom said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. It's embarrassing to have a dad without parents. Can we stop this already, Mom? Let's go, my brother spoke, chomping on his gum. I wanted to retort to tell him that he should be the embarrassed one, an adult with no stable job and dyed hair. But I held back. There was no point in saying anything to these people. It would be a waste. Daniel and I are going to dinner. You two can grab some fast food and don't forget to fold the laundry, all right? Patricia, my mom, responded without waiting for a reply. Without another word, she rolled up the car window, and they drove off. Dad and I just watched them go, saying nothing. Mom and my brother looked down on Dad, belittled him at every turn. Honestly, Mom might be beautiful on the outside, but that's about it. The reason they can do all this is that they're basically living off Dad's income. They've been trash-talking him for as long as I can remember, saying he's a deadbeat from an orphanage, that he has no ambition or excitement in his life. They probably only see Dad as a wallet that listens to their every demand. What's worse, my brother Daniel eats all of this up and joins in on making fun of Dad. Our family has 2 kids, but Mom has always lavished her love only on Daniel. She's pretty much ignored me, giving Daniel whatever he wants whenever he wants. Thanks to that, Daniel still clings to Mom like a child. Even in his 30s, he still calls her mommy and lets her dictate even what he wears and eats. When I heard that Mom accompanied him to every driving lesson, I was floored. I said to my dad, breaking the silence, "Isn't it hard living with those two?" I asked my dad that question. "I'm used to it. Besides, they're still family. I have to do what I can," Dad said in a lonely voice before heading back to the house he shares with Mom and Daniel. All I could do was watch him go. A month passed. I got a call from Mom saying that Dad had collapsed, so I rushed to the hospital. Dad, who looked even more fragile than a month ago, responded, "I got some tests done, and they found cancer. Apparently, it's pretty advanced." My dad had been diagnosed with progressive stomach cancer. According to the doctors, he had about 3 months to live, give or take. I never thought this day would come. I couldn't fathom how this could happen, especially since he's only in his 60s. Even my mom was visibly shaken. "Why did you let things get to this point?" "You and Daniel have been pushing Dad too hard. You know he's been stressed out," I exclaimed. "Christopher, how dare you speak to your parents like that? You're nothing like Daniel. And what is Daniel doing at a time like this? Off gambling again?" Mom interjected, her voice filled with disappointment. While Mom and I were arguing, Dad spoke up quietly. "Both of you stop. I'm fine. Go home for today." "Dad, I'm sorry. I'll be back," I said as I left the hospital room. But between my worries for Dad's health and the shock of his prognosis, I couldn't sleep that night. After that, I took on the responsibility of bringing Dad a change of clothes and doing his shopping as he requested. Sure enough, neither Mom nor my brother lifted a finger. Still, I wanted to make Dad's time as comfortable as possible. I popped into his hospital room during breaks from work and took care of him for 2 months. Then, one day, when I went back to my parents' house to grab some of Dad's belongings, I overheard Mom and my brother talking in the living room. "Mommy, once Dad is gone, the business is all mine, right?" Stunned by my brother's words, I listened more closely. That's when my mom chimed in, "Daniel, it's not a given. Besides, if you do the math, there should be around $2 million in inheritance." "Wow, that's awesome. Maybe I should buy another car." "Why not? You'll be the company president, so you should drive a nice car. Thanks to his life insurance, we can live a little lavishly for a while. It's like a bonus." "Got to thank Dad for not being around," Mom said casually. I felt like I was going to explode with anger. What kind of trash were these people? Unforgivable. I couldn't let them get their way. Just as I was about to unleash my anger, I received a message from Dad. Christopher, can you come to my hospital room alone? I managed to contain my emotions and went to see my dad. He had lost even more weight recently and his complexion looked bad. Christopher. Thank you for always being there, I said to my dad as I sat next to his bed. What are you talking about, Dad? Just tell me what I can do to help, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad hesitated for a moment before speaking, his words heavy with importance. There's something important I need to talk to you about, he began. I listened quietly, holding back the tears, as I responded, visiting hours are almost over, so I'm going to head out. But about what we discussed, Dad, just focus on taking care of yourself for now. Ah, thank you, Christopher. See you later, he said weakly. In the end, that was the last conversation I had with my dad. He took a turn for the worse shortly after and passed away the next day. I held my emaciated father's hand in the hospital room and cried. My mom and brother also put on a show of tears, but only this time, things got pretty tough. After that, Mom was technically in charge of the funeral, but of course, she didn't lift a finger. Instead, she showed up at the funeral all dolled up in makeup and tried to cut corners on the costs. He doesn't even have any relatives. Why not keep it simple? Dad's co-workers and business associates are coming to the funeral. Don't embarrass us with that kind of talk, she remarked. Today, while getting his necktie tied by Mom, Daniel chimed in, just do what Mom says. Don't waste money on a dad like that. Daniel, just be quiet. If it's about money, I'll handle it. At least let me give Dad a proper send-off, I said firmly. So I ended up taking charge of the entire funeral. It seemed Dad was well loved by many people. Lots of folks came to pay their respects, which made me really happy. About a week had passed since the funeral ended, and that's when Mom spoke up. Now that we're a family of 3, finally got that person out of the picture. Now the $2 million inheritance is all ours, right? Daniel and Dad's company too. Man, I'm finally going to be the boss. Listen up, Christopher, you better give up your inheritance. Just after the funeral had ended, they were already talking about this stuff. Annoyed, I replied. Dad had already arranged all the inheritance matters with the lawyer. I have the contact details. What? Why didn't you say that sooner? Call the lawyer right now, my brother exclaimed. That's right, Christopher, hurry up, added my mom. So I dialed the number on the business card that Dad had given me. Not long after, the lawyer arrived, a woman in her mid-30s. I'm Attorney Williams. I've been authorized by James to handle matters concerning the inheritance. I'm very sorry for your loss, he said while shaking hands. My brother Daniel remarked, Wow, I thought lawyers were all old dudes. You're quite the looker. Got a boyfriend? Oh, Daniel, do you like her? Mommy prefers someone younger. Knock it off, both of you, I scolded. Thank you for coming all this way. Please come in, I added, ushering Miss Williams into the room. We listened to what she had to say. Let me explain. First of all, concerning the company, James had told me before he passed that it would be transferred to an acquaintance's company. I've been proceeding with the paperwork. What does that mean? I was supposed to become the CEO. I've heard nothing of the sort. My brother raised his voice in protest. For the sake of the employees, the company will be merging with a trusted and skilled company that your father was fond of. The other company has already agreed, so there's nothing that can be done. That damn outsider. Damn it, my brother exclaimed. My mom hurriedly chimed in, Daniel, calm down. The inheritance is ours, right? It should be around $2 million, shouldn't it? Miss Williams answered matter-of-factly, no, there's nothing like that. The company was not doing as well as you think, and any remaining assets have been used to prepare for the company's transfer. What? What about our money? There should be $2 million coming in. Mommy, what's going on? I questioned. Patricia has received a substantial life insurance payout. She has left a will expressing the desire to gift that money, Miss Williams explained. My mom interrupted. What are you talking about? We've already spent that on a new. The lawyer mentioned Dad's multiple insurance policies. Right then, the question about other life insurance payouts arose. What about those other payouts regarding life insurance? I asked. James had canceled all policies before he passed. All I know is that the money was used up, Miss Williams replied. What? Where did all the money go before he died? Damn it, was he planning to leave us without a dime? I muttered in frustration. I watched as Miss Williams left and my mom and brother lost their composure. As she left, she said, "It's tough, isn't it?" All I could do was give her a forced smile in return. Later, I looked up at the night sky, recalling the last conversation I had with my father while walking. "Christopher, would you take over the company if I die? There might not be much in assets, but I should be able to leave you at least the insurance money. There should be enough of that," Dad had said. "What are you talking about, Dad? You were the only one in the family who was kind to me. I wanted to leave something for you at least, Dad. I respect you for building the company from scratch with your own hard work. I want to make it on my own too. I don't need the company or the insurance money, but if there's any inheritance left, I want you to use it as you wish. I'll help in any way I can," I had replied. "Christopher, thank you." "Thank you," Dad had said with gratitude. As I continued walking, I realized I had arrived at the facility, despite it being night. Mr. Smith was in the yard, and when he saw me, he ran over in tears. "Christopher, James passed away so suddenly. He told me not to come to the funeral. But actually, Mr. Smith, my dad was grateful for both you and the facility. I just found out too, a little while ago. James made a large donation to the facility, a really large one. Now we can buy the things the kids need. We might even be able to renovate. Thank you, but I wish James could have lived. I wish he could have been." While comforting a tearful Mr. Smith, I found myself crying too. Looking up at the starry sky, I whispered in my heart, "Dad, you did it. You really did it." A few months later, I had occasionally met with lawyer Miss Williams to handle the intricate legalities of transferring the company and settling the estate. This was to be my last meeting with her. After expressing my gratitude for her support, Miss Williams offered her condolences once more, comforting me in a considerate manner. As I was seeing off Miss Williams, I thought about how I might never see her beautiful face again. She was such a kind and gracious person. Just then, as I was waving goodbye, a familiar car pulled up beside Miss Williams, and out jumped my brother wielding a metal bat. "Ah, hey, what the heck are you doing?" I yelled, quickly tackling my brother. "Shut up. Let go of me." His face turned red as I held him down on the ground. He was struggling. "Were you trying to attack Miss Williams? What's going on? What's going on?" I demanded. "Because of her. I didn't get the company or the money. It's her fault. Damn it." "That's ridiculous. This isn't Miss Williams' fault," I responded. I had thought he was foolish, but this was beyond anything I'd expected. While shielding a trembling Miss Williams, I called the police. Inside my brother's car, not just a bat, but also a rope and a stun gun were found. Clearly weapons. He was swiftly arrested. When our mother found out, she fumed, "You'd send Daniel to jail. Your own family. How heartless." I replied calmly, "I no longer consider you or him family. My only family was my late dad. I'm cutting ties with both of you." Mom was still ranting, but I ignored her and cooperated fully with the police investigation. I later found out that my brother had also been repeatedly harassing Miss Williams online, making vulgar comments and slandering her. Threats had even been made, and the police were in the process of identifying him. My brother was sentenced to jail for his attempted attack on Miss Williams. She also sued him in civil court for defamation, and he was ordered to pay damages too. Please take every penny he has if that'll make him reflect on his actions. I'm truly sorry for all this, I said upon my apology. Miss Williams gave a faint smile and said, "I'll do just that. Thank you for saving me from a dangerous situation. From now on, I hope you at least find happiness, Christopher." Several months later, when spring arrived, I found myself at Sakura Garden. Today, it wasn't for volunteering, it was a business meeting. Thanks to the funding from my father's donation, the aging facility was planning a renovation. Mr. Smith had approached me for the architectural design. I initially declined, citing my inexperience, but Mr. Smith was unyielding. James always proudly said, "Christopher will become an exceptional architect. He's already surpassed me. We can do this because of James. I'd really like for you to take on this project, Christopher," Mr. Smith insisted. With sentiments like that, how could I say no? I wanted to create a wonderful building that brings even a small amount of happiness to the kids and Mr. Smith. I'm sure my dad would have been proud of that. As for my brother, well, he hasn't changed even after his sentencing. Actually, he's become even more irresponsible. Though he avoided jail due to probation, he still begs our mom for money daily, starts drinking in the afternoon, and gambles away what he borrows. My mom is being pushed around by my brother every day. The large house we lived in, thanks to my dad, along with the car bought with insurance money, were sold to pay for Miss Williams' compensation and my brother's bail. Now, it seems they live together in an old apartment. A friend told me she's lost her beauty and looks more like an old woman now. She brought this upon herself. But I hope she at least reflects on how she treated my dad poorly before he passed away and raised my brother to be such a mess. One last thing. I'm going to marry Miss Williams, the lawyer, soon. She told me in confidence that she felt attracted to me after I saved her from my brother's violent behavior. She's a bit on the serious side, but I really love her for her kindness and dependability. From here on, I aim to work hard and be like my dad, building a warm and loving home.
The young woman stood next to the crib, peering at the sleeping baby. She couldn't bear the child and was ready to lose her cool. Of course, she didn't mean to harm the baby, but Sophia was quite fed up, especially with her mind clouded by alcohol. This child served as a painful reminder that her husband had been married before, and this baby was the result of their past love. Sophia felt anger every time she looked at the child, but she had no choice but to endure Christina's antics, even though she didn't want to. Sophia wished for her own kids as son or daughter with Adrian, and she didn't care about what would happen to Christina. Frustrated, Sophia left the nursery for the kitchen, where she received a message from her spouse and started setting the table. She prepared a meal and brewed some coffee while glancing out the window. Soon his car appeared, and she flinched, unsure why she reacted that way. She had been anticipating this moment to have a much-needed conversation. Sophia had tried to start this conversation before, but fear always held her back. She was afraid that if she gave him an ultimatum, her or the girl, he might leave her. She didn't want to share a roof with his child from his previous marriage, even though she had no connection to the girl. Adrian entered the apartment, shaking off the snow from his coat, which instantly melted onto it. He was covered in snow, even though it was only a short walk from the car to the entrance. After removing his boots, he went straight to the shower to warm up. And when he emerged, he changed into fresh clothes and made his way to the kitchen. Sitting down at the table, Adrian appeared far from cheerful. In fact, he had been in a sour mood lately, with work problems piling up and affecting his family life. He glanced at his wife, knowing she was about to start an uncomfortable conversation that wouldn't make him happy. Adrian brought the coffee closer and took a sip, immediately noticing she'd forgotten the sugar. She sat across from him, looking at him as if he should have known what this conversation would be about. Adrian, we're a young family. We should live on our own, she said, addressing her husband. She wanted him to make the decision himself and desperately hoped he'd agree to take care of the girl somehow, even if it meant not having children of their own. She just wanted to be alone with Adrian and get rid of the constant reminder of his late wife. Really, Adrian, we should have our own children or just be a couple. She's a complete stranger to me. Why do we need someone else's child in our home? You don't even deal with her. You don't interact or communicate with her at all. Why should I be the one dealing with it? She pressed, urging him to see her perspective. Adrian replied calmly, well, let's start with the fact that you're a woman. He felt anger brewing inside him, irritated by his wife's repeated conversations on this topic. It seemed she would continue until the very end. He continued, why do I have to listen to all this right now? You stay home all day, and I provide for you. All you're required to do is clean the house, cook meals, and take care of the child. That's it. Instead of saying thank you for my constant hard work, I have to listen to your complaints. Sophia, exasperated, retorted, yeah, whatever, Adrian. What complaints? I just want us to be a happy family, not like we took in a girl no one wants. I'd understand if you actually cared for her, spent time with her. But you brought her home like a pet, and I'm stuck dealing with her. Sophia calmly expressed her frustration, though there were hints of tension in her voice, like she was on the edge of losing her cool. She had promised herself to keep the conversation civil this time, hoping to avoid the outbursts that hadn't worked in the past. She was desperate to get the girl out of their house. Their talk grew louder and more intense, and the little girl, whom Sophia thought was asleep, was actually wide awake. She cracked her door open and overheard the heated discussion in the kitchen. Quietly, she dialed her father's sister's number, which she had memorized. Her aunt had made her remember it for moments like this. As Christina spoke to her aunt, Carolina, on the phone, she shared what was happening at home. Carolina listened carefully, but had her own thoughts in mind. She assured the little girl that she would handle everything and told her not to worry. Carolina also instructed Christina to delete the call from the phone to keep it a secret. Christina hung up, erased the call, and returned to her room, still hearing her parents argue in the kitchen. She didn't understand her place in their lives. She loved her mom dearly, but she wasn't there anymore. All she had was her dad, who seemed indifferent, and her stepmother, who couldn't stand her. In her room, Christina tried to distract herself, clutching her favorite toy her mom had given her. She tried to fall asleep, all the while hearing her parents' unpleasant conversation in the background. The discussion in the kitchen continued, causing discomfort for everyone involved. The man grew increasingly irritated. After a long and exhausting day at work, he just wanted peace and a quiet evening, free from arguments. He couldn't care less about what Sophia wanted to discuss. But Sophia was determined to finish the conversation, stating, "Adrian, you said you loved me when we got together, and you promised there would be no mention of the past. Instead, you brought a girl into our home. I want you to understand that she doesn't belong here. Can't you see it? What will become of her as she grows up? Do you know what happens to girls who live in a family where they're unwanted? They end up pregnant at 15. I don't want her burdening us with a child in the future because that's what will happen. She's not needed here. Don't your late wife's relatives have someone who could take her in?" Adrian was surprised that Sophia hadn't erupted into hysteria yet. The conversation continued, and she remained composed. Evidently, this talk was truly significant to her. "I'm her father, so it's my responsibility to take care of her. But I don't have time because I work. You're a woman. It's your job to take care of the kids. Besides, I'm not interested in having more children. So, if you want kids, we won't have any more together. You already have a child," Adrian replied somewhat rudely. He grabbed his plate of food and retreated to the living room, turning on the TV to drown out his wife's words. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sophia sat at the table, her face buried in her hands. She had hoped this conversation would change things, but deep down, she knew it wouldn't. Time had passed, and her attempts to break through this wall had failed. She glanced at her husband, who shook his head in disagreement. Feeling defeated, she stood by the doorway, wondering if she would ever succeed. The answer eluded her. Cleaning up the kitchen, she put away the food and then went to bed, wrapping herself in a blanket and quickly falling asleep. Late into the night, the man sat on the couch, haunted by his wife's words echoing in his mind. He partly agreed with her. The girl wasn't wanted in their home. Yet, he couldn't just send her away to an orphanage. Days passed, marked by a biting cold that arrived unexpectedly early. Winter had come with a fierce chill, freezing everything in its grasp. The man kissed his wife goodbye and ventured into the snowstorm, bundling up against the icy winds. His wife watched, worried about his journey. Lately, she had been preoccupied with thoughts of his ex-wife's fate, a tragic car accident that left him with their daughter. The girl's presence in their home irked Sophia. She and her husband had agreed to send her away to a boarding school once she grew older. But Sophia didn't want to wait. Frustrated, she poured herself wine, trying to cope with the situation. Meanwhile, the little girl, half awake, stumbled in the dark, knocking over a glass and Sophia's favorite mug. Sophia's temper flared unexpectedly. She scolded the girl, her anger boiling over. Eventually, in her frustration, she locked the girl out on the icy balcony, leaving her alone in the freezing night. The little girl was only wearing a thin tank top, and in that cold weather, she quickly felt the freezing chill. What happened next is too scary to even think about. Adrian had a really tough day at work that drained him emotionally. To cope, he met up with an old friend, went to a bar, danced with young girls, and only after that did he go home. It felt like a little break, a sigh of relief. His exhaustion had built up so much that he couldn't see anything around him. Work, constant fights with his bosses, pending projects. It was overwhelming. Tired, he looked around. The snow-covered city made him feel sad. He longed for the time when he was married, working from home, his ex-wife taking care of the child, bringing him sandwiches while he worked. They used to sit on the balcony in the evenings, wrapped in blankets, sipping coffee while the little one slept in the cradle. But after his wife's death, he stopped feeling anything for the little girl. It was as if all his emotions towards her vanished. The car was parked near the entrance, but he couldn't bring himself to get out. He wished he could go back to the past, to be happy again. He loved his ex-wife deeply, mourned her when she passed, and that pain lingered within him. He finally got out of the car, entered the building, climbed the stairs to the apartment, and went inside. When Adrian returned from work, he saw a horrifying scene. The living room was in shambles. His intoxicated wife and her friend lay on the couch, but their child was nowhere to be found. The balcony door was wide open. Panicked, Adrian rushed to the balcony and saw small footprints and abandoned shoes. He shook his wife, trying to get answers, but she was unresponsive. He closed the balcony door, feeling a mix of shock and confusion. Adrian decided not to take any drastic steps until his wife sobered up. He forced her into a cold shower, gave her coffee, and repeated the process until she could talk properly. She was shivering and still couldn't explain what had happened. He left his wife alone and returned to the living room, leaving her with her friend. Adrian was shocked by what had happened. He couldn't sleep until 4 a.m., realizing he had to work the next day, or rather that day. He kept wondering where his daughter could be. Sophia could only speak clearly by 6 in the morning. Adrian couldn't fathom why she felt so terrible. He was afraid to imagine the mess they had gotten into. Sophia said his sister had taken little Christina. Adrian froze, not understanding why Caroline was involved. Without dealing with his wife, he quickly got ready and went to work. Throughout the day, he couldn't shake the need to visit Caroline and have a proper conversation with her. After work, despite the heavy snowfall, Adrian drove to his sister's place at the other end of the city. He parked near her familiar house, knocked on the gate, shivering in the cold. Caroline appeared at the doorstep, a beautiful young woman with long braided hair. She led her brother inside, and he explained he couldn't stay long due to the snow. Adrian questioned why Caroline had taken Christina in the first place. She told him that a few days ago, Christina had called her, saying her stepmother was tormenting her. When Caroline arrived, she found the girl in a terrible state because Sophia had put her on the icy balcony in just a tank top. Caroline quickly took Christina to the hospital, wrapping her in a fur coat to warm her up. Meanwhile, Sophia was busy getting drunk with her friend, completely unaware of what was happening. The doctor assured them that Christina would be fine, but they needed to keep her under observation due to severe hypothermia. Caroline couldn't understand Adrian's calm reaction. She was furious that he hadn't protected his daughter. A real father, she thought, would have confronted his wife for nearly killing their child. Despite her frustration, Adrian didn't say anything, leaving his sister to question his lack of action. He told his sister, "I even agreed that we would send her to a boarding school once she reached school age, but apparently she decided not to wait. We understand that we don't need her," Adrian said honestly. Carolina was shocked but chose not to argue. She changed the subject, deciding that if Adrian didn't want the girl, she would raise her herself. She found herself in a similar situation in her own childhood when she was unwanted by her family. Adrian came back home the next day after work, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He looked at his wife, who was clearly worried about him. They hugged each other in the hallway, and she confessed her love for him. They spent a lovely evening together, talking, watching TV, and eventually making love before falling asleep. Carolina, on the other hand, stood outside the hospital, waiting for her niece. When she saw Christina being brought towards her, she entered the building. She signed the necessary papers, picked up the little girl, and carried her to the car. Christina felt safe with her aunt, not her stepmother, and began crying when she thought about going back. Carolina reassured her, saying they wouldn't return to her stepmother and father. She explained that they had decided not to take her, and she was going to be her legal guardian. Christina smiled, relieved and happy. Carolina felt a warm glow in her heart seeing the girl's happiness. In the following weeks, Carolina finalized the paperwork, becoming Christina's legal guardian. Her brother, Adrian, gladly handed over guardianship, even sending money as child support. He was willing to pay any amount as long as he didn't have to take care of the girl. In just 6 months, Christina started calling Carolina Mom. They built a life together, facing challenges but also learning from each other. Carolina helped Christina learn basic skills, and the little girl quickly became independent. She went to daycare happily, and they lived together, practically inseparable. Despite occasional disagreements, Carolina cherished the little girl and loved her dearly. The past didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Christina was safe and happy. I've been happily married for 2 decades now. Despite not having children, my wife, Emily, and I share a deep and affectionate bond. Our colleagues at work recognize us as a devoted couple, a reputation I inadvertently cultivated by frequently discussing our harmonious relationship, be it at social gatherings or casual conversations. One evening, I found myself at a nearby pub, invited by a junior colleague who sought my counsel. Typically, such requests were anticipated, with pre-decided topics. This time, however, the conversation veered toward improving deteriorating marriages, a subject spanning from trivial matters to grave concerns. This colleague, a man who had faced marital crisis before, had heard about my contented marriage and approached me for advice. Although I didn't believe my guidance was particularly profound, he credited me with helping him navigate his troubled relationship, steering it away from divorce. From that point on, inexplicably, I started receiving more and more requests for marital advice. In my role as the HR manager, I understood the significance of strong marital relationships in enhancing workplace productivity. Hence, I couldn't turn away these consultations. Sometimes, depending on the nature of the discussions, I found myself puzzled, wondering why people confided in me about such personal matters. However, each time a colleague approached me, their demeanor was serious, reflecting the gravity of their concerns. That's why I approach these conversations earnestly, engaging with my colleagues openly. Occasionally, I seek insights from Emily, drawing from her perspective as a woman. Despite the common notion that couples cease communication after 2 decades of marriage, that wasn't the case for us. Consequently, the idea of facing a divorce seemed unthinkable. However, it happened unexpectedly one evening after a usual consultation on marital issues. I arrived home slightly later than usual, around 9 p.m. To my surprise, all the lights were off. I called out for Emily as I entered, but there was no reply. At that time, Emily, a full-time homemaker, seldom left the house. I recalled her mentioning a dinner gathering with her college friends, assuring she'd be back by 8 p.m. The eerie silence inside the dark house left me unsettled. Proceeding to the living room, I switched on the lights, only to find Emily absent. On the table, I noticed a piece of paper. As I read the words inscribed upon it, I was overcome with shock. The message simply stated, "Thank you for everything. Get along well with that person." It was a clear indication of our breakup, with that person undoubtedly referring to another woman. It became evident that suspicions of my infidelity were looming, though I had no inkling as to who might be behind these accusations. An uneasy feeling settled in, prompting me to dial Emily's number repeatedly. Strangely, she didn't answer, and her voicemail remained untouched. I hesitantly reached out through WhatsApp, but my message lingered unread for what felt like an eternity. Emails met with the same silence. Desperation pushed me to dial Emily's family home. a rare move for me. My mother-in-law's surprised tone greeted me, questioning if something was amiss. "Is something wrong, Matt?" she inquired. Her concern deepened my sense of foreboding. I had assumed Emily would be at her parents' house, but her absence there left me fumbling for an excuse. "Oh no, it's just that Emily couldn't decide what to get for Mother's Day, so I thought I'd ask you secretly without her knowing," I blurted, acutely aware of the flimsiness of my excuse. "We'll still think it over together, of course." Without waiting for her response, I hastily hung up, my heart pounding with guilt. The following day came and went, devoid of any communication from Emily. Clueless about her whereabouts, I spent the day in a state of restless anxiety. On the evening of the second day since Emily's disappearance, the doorbell pierced the quietness of the house. I rushed to the doorbell monitor, hoping beyond hope that it was Emily's return. I was taken aback when I saw my mother-in-law on the monitor, her unexpected presence surprising me. "I couldn't help but worry about the way you sounded on the phone," she said, her concern evident in her voice. Realizing there was no point in trying to deceive her, I showed her the message Emily had left behind. The moment she read it, her expression turned stern, and suspicion clouded her eyes. Despite my calm explanation that I had no knowledge of the message's meaning, she remained unconvinced. Her doubts about me lingered, unresolved, and she eventually left, leaving me to grapple with the mystery of Emily's disappearance. In the wake of Emily's vanishing act, I found myself repeatedly pondering the message's cryptic meaning, but I remained clueless. After much contemplation, I decided to visit the police station and file a missing person report. However, the police officer I spoke to dismissed my concerns. Persisting, I pressed on, but the officer seemed irritated and asked, "Have there been any strange changes in your wife's behavior recently? Any signs of another man?" His unexpected question caught me off guard. In a fit of anger, I retorted, "There's no way something like that would happen with Emily." However, the officer, likely accustomed to such defensive responses from concerned spouses, remained unfazed, his expression unchanged. He calmly continued, "Sir, please." I agreed to file the missing person report, though I couldn't shake the feeling that the officer's response was mechanical, lacking genuine interest in finding Emily. Leaving the police station, the word cheating lingered in my mind, an unsettling echo of the officer's inquiry. Back home, I continued to dwell on Emily's recent behavior, searching for any suspicious signs. Despite my efforts, I couldn't pinpoint anything alarming. In the days following Emily's disappearance, I slept in the living room, ready to respond to any communication. One night, the doorbell's chime jolted me awake. I hurried to the monitor and was surprised to see my mother-in-law's stern face. Hastily, I opened the front door, bracing myself for her reprimand. Unexpectedly, she uttered astonishing words. "Emily is at my house right now." I stood there, frozen, absorbing her words. After a deep breath, I snapped back to reality, swiftly preparing to leave. Just before I stepped out, my mother-in-law said, "I suspected you. I'm sorry." She had come in person to apologize, explaining her stern demeanor earlier. Rushing to Emily's parents' house, my mind raced, contemplating the situation. I reasoned that the last time my mother-in-law visited, Emily had probably been at her parents' place. However, Emily must have abruptly returned home, explaining the situation to her mother. In my mind, I envisioned my mother-in-law coming to my house, intending to confront me directly, perhaps even interrogating me rigorously. Yet, witnessing my flustered state, she might have doubted the accuracy of Emily's words and left without saying anything. She had no way to verify the truth, so she returned home empty-handed. Today, she'd likely heard something from Emily and came to apologize. With these thoughts driving me, I hurried to Emily's parents' house. The journey was a mere 20-minute walk, but I wanted to confirm Emily's safety urgently, so I ran. Upon reaching my childhood home, Emily, as soon as she saw my face, began apologizing profusely, her tears flowing freely. I found myself at a loss for words, caught in a somewhat comical state of disorientation. Finally, when Emily regained her composure, she began speaking quietly, explaining her side of the story. As I listened, all the tension left my body. The reason she had left home was a complete misunderstanding on her part. On that day, Emily had glimpsed me while she was on her way home after finishing dinner with her friends. I was merely walking, carrying a small child. Beside me stood a woman in her early 30s, the two of us appearing like a genuine parent-child duo. Emily murmured, reminding me of the day when she had spotted me. It was a day when I had received a consultation from a junior colleague. Later, in the evening after work, I had a discussion with his wife. This colleague of mine, still engrossed in his work, had 2 children, both about to turn 2 years old. He had refrained from joining the discussion, fearing he might inadvertently worsen things if he were present. The root cause of the couple's relationship deterioration was the wife's constant complaints about his late arrivals home due to a significant project's final stages, demanding his late-night presence. He was deeply involved in the project, often working late into the night. Consequently, he returned home exhausted and lacked the patience to listen to his wife's grievances. One day, his wife's patience wore thin, and she exploded in anger. Despite his numerous apologies, she seemed inconsolable. Feeling desperate, he pleaded with me, "I can't take it anymore. Please do something." It was then that I intervened to mend their relationship. Of course, Emily was unaware of my involvement. On the day she saw us walking together, seemingly amicable, she instinctively suspected me of cheating. In reality, we were simply walking together to the bus terminal near the station. Unbeknownst to me, Emily discreetly followed the 3 of us. Her intuition had solidified into conviction when she saw the child I was holding address me as Daddy. My cheerful response, a simple "What's up?" was all it took. I still remember the joy I felt when the child called me Daddy, and how my smile had widened in response. Yet, as I grinned, Emily's world seemed to darken before her eyes. Shocked, she rushed home immediately, leaving a message before heading to her parents' house. Tearfully, she recounted the day's events to her mother, releasing the pent-up emotions that had consumed her. As she spoke, relief seemed to find her, and she fell into an exhausted sleep. When Emily woke, her mother was no longer there. At that moment, her mother must have been en route to my house. Today, Emily realized it was all a misunderstanding. One day, at her mother-in-law's suggestion, we went to the shopping center, hoping to distract ourselves. While there, Emily spotted a woman and a child she had seen in town, accompanied by a man of similar age. Acting on impulse, Emily approached them. Standing before them, she was at a loss for words. The man looked surprised initially, but then he smiled, saying, "Oh, Mrs. Thomas, hello. We've always appreciated your help." Emily was bewildered. Why did this man know her? It turned out the man explained, "Mr. Thomas had a picture of you 2 on his smartphone's wallpaper. He proudly showed it off when we talked about our troubled relationship. But the other day, your child called him Daddy." Emily, baffled, mentioned this to the woman beside him, who looked puzzled for a moment before apologetically explaining, "I'm sorry. Our child calls any adult man Daddy. Someone overheard it and misunderstood." Hearing this, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. "You've always been a bit clumsy, but this one's the funniest so far." Emily, upon hearing this explanation, felt a mix of embarrassment and relief. Finally, she smiled. It was the first time in 4 days that I had seen her smile. Unable to contain my emotions, I said, "Please continue showing me that smile from now on." In response, Emily nodded quietly. I couldn't abandon my mother. I was consumed by worry for my father. "Please, can you drive?" "Take us to the hospital," I implored Bob, desperation lacing my voice. For a moment, Bob just stared at me, but then he nodded. "All right," he said, and immediately began preparing himself. "Thank you," I murmured, my relief palpable. Swiftly, I readied myself, and together, we set out towards the hospital in Bob's car. As we ventured deeper into the woods, something seemed awry with the car. I'm sorry, but can you get out and check the front tire? Bob requested. Obliging, I stepped out, shutting the passenger door behind me. But to my bewilderment, as I inspected the tire, Bob started the car without letting me back in. He pulled the vehicle over to the opposite lane, hurriedly approached me, and tossed my bag at me through the open window. That's for waking me up in the middle of the night. He sneered before speeding away, disappearing from sight in no time. 2 hours later, I arrived at the hospital, my heart pounding with fear. There, I found Bob critically injured. My name is Catherine Thompson, 24 years old, a housewife. After college, I had joined a major corporation, but I resigned after marrying a senior colleague, Bob. Bob was not only handsome and intelligent, but also an all-around athlete, every girl's dream man. My initial feelings for him were akin to a fan's adoration for a celebrity, thrilled by his presence in the office and any interaction with him. Unexpectedly, Bob approached me one day after I was assigned to the administrative department. Our relationship escalated from work-related conversations to dating, and soon after, we were married. I had always wondered why he had chosen me. When I asked him, he simply said, "Because you loved me the most," making my heart swell with joy. However, after our marriage, a discomfort settled in. Bob became increasingly critical, chastising me for trivial matters like overcooking eggs or not responding to messages promptly. He'd quizzed me on complex subjects, always pointing out my flaws with a calm yet condescending demeanor. I found myself walking on eggshells, trying desperately to meet his ever-changing standards, hoping to avoid his disapproval. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my ordeal. All I could think about was avoiding Bob's scolding. It had become my sole preoccupation. However, as exhaustion wore me down, Bob would interject, his tone laced with dissatisfaction. "You know, Catherine, appearances do matter. Lately, you look perpetually tired. What would people think? You should always present yourself at your best as my wife," he'd admonish. He insisted on buying me expensive clothes, makeup, and spa treatments. Ironically, the one thing I didn't need to worry about was money, thanks to Bob's wealth. I strained my nerves to meet his demands, trying to enhance my appearance. Consequently, people around me would shower me with compliments like, "Catherine, you have such a wonderful husband. I'm so envious. I wish I could have married someone like Bob. How I wish I could trade places with you." From their perspective, I understood their envy, but the reality was a living nightmare. Desperately following Bob's orders, 2 years passed. Underneath my smiling facade, I was slowly losing myself. Then, one late night, my smartphone rang, snapping me from my momentary escape into a dream world back to harsh reality. Glancing at Bob, who was sleeping next to me, I answered the call. It was my mom, her voice filled with distress. "Catherine, your father." She choked out between sobs. "Dad had had a heart attack and was undergoing surgery." "What? Dad?" I exclaimed, my heart racing. "Okay, I got it. I'm on my way." I hung up and turned to Bob, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on at this hour?" I asked. The clock showed it was well past 1 a.m. "Sorry, but..." I explained the situation, desperation coloring my words. "I need to go to the hospital. Can you drive me there?" Bob stared at me in silence for what felt like an eternity. It was a critical moment for my father. Surely, even Bob would agree to drive. Although I had a driver's license, I wasn't allowed to drive Bob's car. "I can't leave my mom alone. I'm worried about Dad. Can you please drive? Take me to the hospital." After what seemed like an endless pause, Bob finally relented. "All right," he muttered, and began to get dressed. "Thank you," I said, gratitude washing over me. I quickly prepared myself, and soon we were on our way to the hospital in Bob's car. The hospital was only about 7 to 8 miles away, a mere 10 to 15 minutes drive by car. The main road offered a direct route to the hospital, but Bob chose to take a detour onto a side road, claiming it was faster because it was the middle of the night. "I'm grateful you're trying to get me there quickly," I said, appreciating his concern. Despite his harshness, I believed deep down that he cared for me. After driving down the side road for a while, we entered a wooded area. I remembered Bob mentioning that this route was more scenic during our drives. Suddenly, Bob stopped the car, and I got out as he requested, closing the passenger door behind me. But then, to my shock, Bob started the car without me inside. It moved a short distance forward, then reversed, turned around, and came back to where I stood, utterly bewildered. I had a crucial presentation scheduled for the next day, and here I was, abruptly awakened at this ungodly hour. Bob had parked on the opposite lane, and he hurried toward me, hurling my bag through the open window. "This is your punishment for waking me up in the middle of the night," he sneered in a chilling tone before driving off in the same direction. In the dim light of the forest, it was almost surreal how swiftly he vanished from sight. The location was within a not-so-deep forest, and the clock was inching towards 2 a.m. Most people might have felt helpless or even broken down in such a situation, but oddly, I felt a strange sense of relief. I kept walking straight toward the hospital, a distance of about 6 miles. All I could think about was reaching my parents as quickly as possible. Bob's angry face was the last thing on my mind. When he'd thrown that bag at me, I had nearly broken down in tears, wondering what I had done to deserve such treatment. But in my confusion, Bob's words echoed in my mind. "It's punishment for waking me up in the middle of the night." If it were some trivial reason, it would be my fault. But what if my father-in-law was in critical condition, undergoing emergency surgery, and my mother-in-law was anxiously waiting? Bob seemed utterly indifferent to my need to be with them. His actions were far from normal. I had once imagined Bob as a prince from a fairy tale, living a dream by marrying him. But that dream had transformed into a nightmare. The real-life prince turned out to be selfish, admitting he married me because I was his biggest admirer, an easy person to manipulate. I had believed I was loved and chosen by him, striving to be a good wife. But now I no longer cared. In that forest, I found my freedom. I couldn't go back to that cage, nor did I have any intention to. As I walked hastily through the forest, my mind was filled with thoughts of liberation from the superficiality of Bob's existence. After about 2 hours of walking, I finally reached the hospital. I informed the staff at the emergency entrance about my father, who had been brought in by an ambulance and was undergoing surgery. After verifying my details, they handed me a visitor's badge, which I wore around my neck. In the dimly lit corridor, the sound of my heels clicking on the floor was the only noise. 2 hours had passed since my arrival, and my anxiety grew. I wondered how my dad was faring and how my mom was holding up. My pace quickened naturally. After turning a few corners, I saw my mom sitting under a dim light on the sofa. "Mom," I called out, and she looked up, tears streaming down her face. An unsettling feeling settled in my chest. "Is something wrong with Dad?" I asked, sitting down next to her. "No, no," she reassured me. "I just felt relieved seeing your face. Your dad is still in surgery." You startled me. A surge of blood rushed from my heart, draining me of all strength. After what felt like an eternity, the lights in the operating room finally dimmed. The surgeon emerged, delivering the news we desperately awaited. The operation had been successful. Although it would take time for my father's condition to stabilize, the immediate danger had passed. My mother and I cried tears of relief together. In the solemn corridors of the hospital, we followed as my father was transferred to the ICU on a stretcher, his face peaceful in slumber. There was nothing more we could do but wait for him to wake up and recover. It was essential to ensure my mother got some rest. I couldn't help but feel anger at Bob, thinking about the lonely hours my mother had endured before my arrival. I led my mother to the vending machine area, buying her a warm tea. "Here, drink this to calm down," I said, handing her the cup. "Thank you," she said, sipping her coffee. Her calmness brought me a sense of relief too. We sat in the coffee area, the soft glow of dawn illuminating our surroundings. Suddenly, a nurse approached us. "Excuse me, are you Catherine Thompson, Bob Thompson's wife?" she inquired. I nodded in confirmation. She explained that my husband had been brought in around 2 a.m. the previous night, and they had been trying to contact me without success. I hastily checked my phone, realizing I had muted it, thinking I'd be at the hospital shortly. There were several missed calls from an unknown number, which turned out to be the hospital's. Bob had provided both our home and mobile numbers, expecting me to follow him home. He likely never anticipated that I would walk over 6 miles alone to the hospital through the woods. I explained my father's situation and apologized for missing the calls. The nurse then updated me about Bob. After leaving me behind, he had an accident on his way home. Both his legs were broken, and he needed surgery. I asked my mother to wait and went to see him. The nurse led me to the room where Bob lay, his legs immobilized, looking pitiful. He tried to speak, realizing I wasn't alone. "I'm sorry for putting you through this, especially with your father in such a state. I'm glad you came," he said, offering an apologetic smile. As the nurse left, Bob's tone changed. "Where the hell have you been? Why didn't you answer the phone right away?" he demanded, accusatory. "Where you think? You told me my father had surgery." "Obviously, I was at the hospital," I replied, my voice laced with defiance. Bob seemed genuinely shocked by my response. "What's with that tone? Haven't I always told you to speak politely and gracefully? I won't tolerate such language," he chastised, attempting to regain control. "Why should I be polite to someone who deceived me and left me in a forest in the middle of the night? I don't feel the need to show such consideration," I said, my voice firm. "I don't have a master anymore. I reclaimed myself in that forest," I declared confidently, asserting my newfound freedom. I stood my ground, proclaiming my freedom, and Bob's face twisted with invisible anger. "Is that what someone who's been taken care of should say?" he retorted defiantly. "Well, is that what someone who's been cared for should say?" I shot back, my words laced with a newfound confidence. Bob jerked in shock, causing pain in his immobilized legs, and he let out a cry of pain. I looked down at him coldly, his face contorted in agony and drenched in sweat. "Guess you got what was coming to you," I said, a chuckle escaping me naturally after my words. I laughed, and Bob cried, roles reversed. "What's so funny? It's all your fault I'm in this mess. Don't you feel guilty?" Bob's voice was tearful yet defiant. "My fault? No, I think it's someone who left his wife in a forest and hurried home." "Serves you right," I countered, my tone unyielding. Bob looked at me in disbelief, shock and fear reflecting in his eyes. His once obedient wife, who had admired him, was now confronting him with icy words and glances, as if he were a stranger. He seemed disturbed, his eyes darting around the room. I realized he was just a small, insignificant man. I felt a sense of shame for having feared and submitted to him for so long. "We should break up," I spoke firmly. "I don't see any point in being married to you anymore. I'll wait until you're discharged from the hospital, so please prepare yourself. In the meantime, I'll pack up our stuff at home. Don't be ridiculous. I'm never going to leave you. Do you realize how much time and effort I've put into this relationship?" Bob protested, his voice breaking as he moved. "Do you have anything else to say? If you do, now's the time. What will it be?" I challenged him, but Bob continued to cry, unable to respond. "Nothing then. All right, I have to go care for my father. Take care and goodbye," I said, leaving the room, Bob groaning in pain. Later that day, my father woke up, and we held hands, tears of joy streaming down our faces. Although he still had a way to go in his recovery, it was a relief to know he was stable. I returned to my family home with my mom and shared my decision to divorce Bob. Initially shocked, my mother nodded in silence after hearing my side of the story and welcomed me back home. She had never imagined her daughter, whom she believed was living happily, was being treated so poorly. I cried at her understanding and for making them worry, weeping until I began preparations for the next step. First, I started looking for a lawyer experienced in divorce cases, which proved surprisingly easy due to a friend's connection in a law firm. I met with a few lawyers and decided on a female attorney who had helped many women like me suffering from emotional abuse. I gained an experienced and powerful ally. Just when Bob was in the hospital, I organized my belongings and prepared to leave the house. The challenge was to prove Bob's fault, which surprisingly turned out to be easy. When Bob had an accident and was questioned by the police, he told them I had an accident on my way back from dropping off my wife at the hospital where she wanted to be with her father, who was undergoing an emergency operation. However, his story seemed off. After all, I arrived at the hospital 2 hours after Bob's accident. When asked where he was and what he was doing during that time, I honestly told them everything, including being abandoned in the forest late at night. At first, the police were shocked, but as they listened, they began to suspect it was malicious abandonment. Many people, not just the police, but also those involved with insurance, his company, and others, eventually found out the truth. Every time Bob made mistakes, I was grateful. In this way, I was able to prove how much Bob had belittled, neglected, and hurt me during our 2-year marriage. He was deemed at fault due to emotional abuse, although it was a short marriage of only 2 years, and I never had to worry about finances. I was able to secure a satisfactory amount in alimony and divorced Bob. After the divorce, I returned to my family home and took care of my father for a while. Fortunately, my father's recovery was smoother than expected, and he seemed to be getting back to his regular life without any lingering effects. His workplace even told him he could return after a brief hiatus, and he was deeply grateful for that stroke of luck. Luckily, I got a job at the law firm that assisted me during my divorce. Thanks to a friend's recommendation and the lawyer who had seen my true nature during my interactions with Bob, the hiring process went smoothly. Thus, our family of 3 was slowly moving forward. Bob had completely lost his trustworthiness since our divorce. No matter how good-looking or elite he might be, he was now recognized as a terrible person who couldn't treat others properly. It seemed like no one wanted anything to do with him anymore. A former colleague reached out, wanting to talk. Apparently, after Bob recovered from his injuries and returned to work, he was spreading the story that I was a terrible woman who abandoned him when he was injured. Despite many people already knowing the real reason for our divorce, I was astounded at how much he underestimated me. So, I asked my lawyer to send him a formal notice threatening to sue for defamation if he didn't correct his story. My friends also shared the real story, and those who were about to believe Bob's version now recognized him as a lying emotional abuser. Well, he still seemed to have his job because he was competent, but I wondered how long he could keep it up in such a hostile environment. Right now, I wasn't ready to look for someone new, but I wanted to find someone who truly cared for me next time. I wanted to show my parents a genuinely happy version of myself. For that day, I would keep my head held high and continue moving forward. After being disowned by my family over 8 years ago, they've reached out to invite me, my 27-year-old wife, and another female acquaintance for Christmas. I've received a mix of advice from friends, with one suggesting I turn to this online community for insight. I'm a 25-year-old male, the youngest of 4 kids born to my 52-year-old mom and 54-year-old dad. My siblings, whom I'll refer to as Michael, 31, male, Sarah, 28, female, and my twin brother Carl, 25, male, all excelled in physical sports. My dad was a star basketball player at Editsu School. My mom played volleyball. Michael excelled in soccer, Sarah in softball, and Carl was the star running back on the football team. I, on the other hand, showed an early interest in archery, which my family regarded as a wimpy sport. They seldom attended my events, and I often had to plead for their presence. Between the ages of 14 and 16, I participated in around 20 archery tournaments, while my parents only showed up to one. Though I wasn't neglected, they were emotionally distant, leaving me feeling overshadowed by my siblings. When I tried to address this, they labeled me an attention seeker. However, my discernment wasn't related to these issues. At 15, I began dating Amy, who was also 15 at the time. We introduced her to my family, and they liked her. However, almost 2 years later, one of Amy's former friends revealed that she had been cheating on me with an unnamed guy. Confronting her, she confessed that it was my twin brother, Carl. She claimed her feelings for him had surpassed those for me. Enraged, I confronted Carl at home, resulting in a physical altercation where I punched him and knocked him out. Although my violent reaction was regrettable, it was the culmination of years of resentment toward him and my family. To avoid legal consequences, my family agreed not to press charges against me. Instead, I was sent to live with my estranged paternal aunt, who lived 2 hours away and was 48 years old at the time. Since then, I've had no contact with my immediate family. Initially challenging, I've managed to move forward with the support of my aunt and her 48-year-old husband, gradually letting go of the desire to mend the broken relationship with my family. I transferred to a different high school and eventually attended a university in my aunt's city, where I graduated as an electrical engineer. Later, I met my wife and married her. When it came time to plan our wedding, I considered inviting my estranged family, but I decided against it to avoid any potential drama. My wife and I purchased a house an hour away from my aunt's place, and we were blessed with a daughter about a year ago. Recently, I received a Facebook message from my parents expressing a desire to reconnect over Christmas at their house. I told them I'd think about it as I might have other plans, but promised to provide a clear answer soon. In the meantime, both Michael and Sarah sent me friend requests on social media, which felt rather strange. My wife, who is 2 months pregnant, suggested that if I chose to go, she and our daughter would spend Christmas at her father's house to avoid unnecessary stress. I agreed with her, considering her well-being. My dilemma is whether to go and attempt to reconcile with my family or not. I'm torn on what to do. On one hand, it's possible they feel remorse for what they did to me and want to apologize. On the other hand, there's the fear that if I go, they might pressure me to apologize to Carl, something I'm not willing to do. Any advice on this matter would be greatly appreciated. Top advice before reading the update. I think you should go another time. Spend Christmas with your wife and child. Visit your family at a less stressful time to see if they have any ulterior motives. It might just be about them wanting to see their grandchildren and not necessarily about you, which would be hurtful to you. Yeah, I agree. Go another time. I was thinking the same thing. It could be related to the grandkids. Spend Christmas with your wife and child. Christmas is too big of an event to meet them. Also, please update us. I can't get this post out of my head. I can't imagine a parent kicking out their child who was betrayed by their other child. They might want to reconnect due to money or their grandchild. I don't know, but it's weird that even his siblings texted OP. I hope it's for good reasons, though. I wouldn't consider spending Christmas away from my pregnant wife for them. Maybe I'm missing something, but why choose Christmas to reach out? They could have contacted me at any time and given me the chance to choose a convenient time to reconnect. They're the ones trying to mend things, so their timing seems odd to me. I personally wouldn't go unless you truly want them back in your life. The situation seems fishy to me. It's possible they found out about my successful child and are now attempting to heal the family image to avoid looking like they abandoned their son years ago. It feels like a trap. I noticed they didn't open with any remorse or sign of an apology. They might want something from me: money, free work, an organ, or access to my children. Or maybe they just want to appear good to their friends. I'm not saying don't go, but keep your expectations low. Be prepared for them to ask me to do something for them in order to reconcile properly and have a quick exit strategy ready. As a parent, I can't fathom going no contact with one of my children for 8 years, especially after the other child did something so cruel to them that they had to resort to hitting them. It's inconceivable to me. I would understand if my son hit his brother under such circumstances. We're all human, and moving past the fact that they abandoned me and turned their backs for 8 years is my choice. Personally, I'm not sure if I could. If I can't or don't want to see them again, I doubt anyone would blame me. If they do blame me, they don't know the full story. And if they do know the full story and still blame me, they're not worth my time either. Now for the update. I wanted to post earlier, but some things got in the way. 2 days after Christmas, my wife began experiencing unbearable pain in her abdomen area. She could hardly stand on her 2 feet. Her sister and I rushed her to the hospital, where we learned that my wife had suffered a miscarriage and that the fetus had to be removed right away. The worst part for me was explaining to my wife what had happened. Due to complications surrounding the operation, my wife had to stay in the hospital for 2 more days. I've been trying to stay strong for my wife and daughter, but honestly, I'm struggling right now. As for the updates on the original post, most of you who commented on the same day advised me not to spend Christmas with them due to the significance of that holiday. I agreed with the advice and decided to spend the rest of the holidays with my wife. When I texted my family, stating my decision, I expected them to argue with me. Surprisingly, they responded by saying they respected my opinion and looked forward to seeing me after the holidays. Curiosity got the best of me, and I started digging into my family to understand why they had reached out after all these years. I found out that Michael is a corporate lawyer working for a major company in our hometown, married with 2 daughters. Sarah, on the other hand, appeared to be married to a doctor and had a son. 8 years ago, she was studying to be a nurse. My friend, whose parents were friends with mine, informed me that Sarah had divorced her first husband, the one she was dating 8 years ago, due to mail fraud. Carl, my twin, married Amy right after high school, and they have 2 kids. I couldn't pinpoint their exact occupations, but the fact that they bought a big house last year suggested they were financially stable. My dad seemed to be going through a midlife crisis, while my mother was heavily involved in the wellness community. I tried to analyze why they might want to reconnect. One possibility was money, but considering my siblings' financial stability, that seemed unlikely. Another suggestion was organ donation, although it didn't make sense given that Carl, my likely match as my twin, was seen skiing in a Facebook post just a week before Christmas. Then there was the matter of my daughter. They might be reaching out to have a relationship with her. Although she wasn't their first granddaughter, I suspected they found out about her through my wife's public Facebook account. My next step was to contact my estranged aunt, the one who took me in, and inform her about the situation. She explained to me why my grandparents had disowned her. After college, she came out as bisexual and started dating her girlfriend, leading to immediate dissownment. However, about 4 years ago, my grandpa began to reconnect, and recently, he had been inquiring about me, my life, marriage, and whether I had kids. My aunt's response was swift and confrontational. She directly challenged my grandpa for his sudden interest in my life, particularly after he had supported Carl for his actions. That's when the whole situation took a surprising turn. Grandpa explained that he believed I deserved to be estranged because, according to him, I had cheated on Amy with one of her close friends. He viewed cheating as a grave offense due to his religious beliefs. According to my family's version of events, the friend who I allegedly cheated with confessed to Amy, who then sought comfort from Carl and Sarah. When I learned about this, I confronted Carl and Sarah, attacking them brutally. Sarah, who had attempted to mediate between me and Carl, was unharmed during the confrontation. Hearing this revelation from my aunt left me in shock. I couldn't fathom the depths of their animosity, leading them to concoct such a terrible lie about me. Later, my aunt disclosed the whole truth to Grandpa, who was utterly shocked as he had always believed Carl to be a good kid. Grandpa then demanded my aunt to provide my phone number, but she refused. I eventually uncovered the real reason my parents and siblings had reached out to me. It turned out Grandpa had given them an ultimatum. Either they apologize for their past mistreatment and invite me to the family Christmas dinner, or they would be cut off from his vast fortune. He was a multi-millionaire, and their financial greed motivated their sudden interest in reconciling. Instead of seeking genuine reconciliation for their past wrongdoings, they were driven by selfish motives. After learning the truth from my aunt, I decided to cut all ties with them. Why should I respond to people who only valued me for the potential inheritance they could gain? In my eyes, they were all dead to me. I had a supportive wife to care for, a family that respected and loved me, and supportive in-laws who were there for us. However, the story didn't end there. 3 days after New Year's Eve, I received an unexpected call on my work phone from an unknown number. Despite being accustomed to such calls due to my career, I picked up, only to hear my grandfather's voice on the other end. He must have obtained my number from my company's website. Surprisingly, his first words were an apology for not attempting to contact me over the past 8 years. He expressed his apologies for missing significant milestones in my life, such as my graduation, wedding, and the birth of my daughter. Frankly, I hadn't been particularly close to him before, so his decision to cut me off financially didn't affect me deeply. As our conversation continued, he revealed his disgust for the rest of my family and stated that he was cutting them off as well, adding me to the list. I found myself conflicted about this news. While the money would undeniably be helpful, I didn't want him to manipulate the situation to force a relationship between me and my daughter. Our conversation lasted about half an hour, during which I began to think that perhaps I could build a genuine connection with my grandpa. However, my feelings changed abruptly when he made a comment that infuriated me. He expressed disappointment that my daughter hadn't taken the family name. To provide some context, after marrying my wife, we discussed using her last name for our future children due to legal constraints preventing me from adopting her name. We made this decision together as a couple. At that moment, I couldn't contain my anger and let loose on my grandpa, labeling him as a senile old man and hurling hurtful words. I made it clear that I never wanted him to contact me again. The audacity of his comment, considering what I had gone through, was beyond infuriating. I resolved not to let him use any potential inheritance to control me. Even if I received the money, my plan was to donate it to a local charity. However, given his history of empty promises, this outcome seemed unlikely. The past few weeks had been incredibly challenging for me. My wife had taken measures to protect our privacy by privatizing her Facebook account, and my in-laws had done the same. How my estranged family planned to contact me remained a mystery, although I suspected they might resort to extreme measures, perhaps even hiring a private detective. As far as I knew, they didn't have information about where I currently lived, but one could never be too certain. I've considered getting a restraining order, but it's complicated given the presence of lawyers in the family. I didn't get the chance to answer some questions from my last post before it was inexplicably deleted. I'll try my best to respond to any questions over the next day or two, but after this, I won't be using the site for a while. Thank you all for your advice, and I wish you the best in this new year. I am profoundly sorry for your loss, OP. I can't even begin to fathom the pain you and your wife must be enduring. Your family's behavior is beyond belief. Their audacity knows no bounds. They don't deserve any more of your time and energy. Forget about them. I genuinely hope they don't bother you anymore, allowing you to focus on your family at home. Thank you for taking the time to update us. Please accept my condolences. I hope your wife recovers soon. Your family has faced some difficult weeks, but don't let these people get to you. Regarding your grandpa's comments about the last name, at least the truth is out, exposing their true colors. Let your grandpa keep the money if it comes your way before you make any decisions. Take your time and think it over calmly. You've chosen wonderful people as your family, your wife, daughter, and in-laws. They are the ones who truly matter. The rest of them can go to hell. I'm sorry for all you've been through and the loss of your child. Remember, you have a family that loves and supports you. You are wanted and cherished by them, even if your parents and siblings don't see it. Please seek professional support and help for yourself and your wife. You've been through a lot, and it's crucial to have the right support. As for the situation with your granddad, it might have convinced him that your aunt's claims were false, especially since they tried to portray you as unstable. While you had every right to be offended, you may have acted impulsively. I understand you've been through a lot, and this might have been the final straw for you. It's just a different perspective to consider. Sending you love and strength. I genuinely hope your wife gets better soon, and I hope the new year brings positive changes for you. At the end of the day, how your granddad perceives you shouldn't matter. A relationship based on money isn't genuine. This might affect the relationship your aunts and grandpa have, but truthfully, they never really had a meaningful relationship to begin with. My wife, a 31-year-old woman, firmly believes that I, a 35-year-old man, should have received a promotion by now, given that I've been working in the same position for the past 7 years. Her frustration began to surface after 5 years in this job, when she started making sarcastic remarks. She would often compare my situation to her friend's husband, who got promotion after just 2 years, and her sister's fiancé, who secured a position after only 3 years at their respective jobs. Ironically, she's been working in retail for 9 years, but has never had the opportunity to move up in her career. I suspect that her constant need to one-up others plays a role in her expectations. For instance, if one of her friend's spouses buys them an expensive item, she expects me to follow suit, simply because others have done so. Unfortunately, we're all too aware of the challenging economic situation in the United States due to the significant increase in prices over the past years. While I do my best to make my wife feel special, there are times when her demands seem excessive, especially when we can't afford such extravagances. Her disappointment with me grew over the past 2 months. Her closest friend received a new car for her birthday from her husband, and my wife expected the same from me. I had to remind her that I was still paying off the last car I bought her. This led to her giving me the cold shoulder, and our communication became sporadic at best. We exchanged greetings when we crossed paths, but that was the extent of it. I slept in the guest room and refused to indulge her because, at this point, I felt she could buy her own car. She believed that giving me the silent treatment would compel me to meet her demands. But when that didn't happen, she stopped talking to me altogether. Then, last week, I came home early from work. I had informed her that I'd be coming home at this time from now on, although she didn't inquire why. I had been prepared to explain my reason if she had asked. Instead, she continued to ignore me. The following day, while wiping the kitchen counter, I noticed her phone near the toaster. It appeared that she had forgotten it while running errands. I was about to leave it there when her phone lit up with an incoming message. Glancing down, I saw that it was from her friend, who inquired if my wife was certain about her earlier response. To my shock, my wife's previous message stated that she was leaving me because I was losing my job, and she couldn't tolerate it any longer. She added that there was no reason for her to stay, and our marriage had become pointless in our lives. I must admit, I was deeply hurt by her words. I never considered our marriage pointless, but it seemed that my wife viewed it as a one-sided relationship, with her taking more than giving. Her assumption that I was losing my job simply because I mentioned coming home early was a typical reaction for her. She always made assumptions without asking questions, so I decided not to inform her about my recent promotion, which came with a substantial pay increase and reduced work hours because I was now managing my own team. I preferred to remain silent and let her think what she wanted. 2 days after I stumbled upon her text messages, she came downstairs while I was preparing dinner, with 2 suitcases packed, and announced that she was going to stay with her closest friend for a while to sort things out. I inquired about her intentions, and she explained that she believed our marriage was no longer working, and she wasn't happy. I respected her decision to leave and continued with my evening. The next day, my first paycheck with the pay increase hit my account, and I was astounded by the amount of money I would now be earning. I contacted my good friend, her closest friend's husband, and suggested we go car shopping together. He picked me up, and we drove to the dealership. After choosing a car I liked, I drove away in my new vehicle. We had lunch together before parting ways to our respective homes. I suspected he might have mentioned my new car and the money I spent on it to his wife, or that my wife was present during the conversation. All of a sudden, my wife called my phone. I didn't answer the first call and let her call 2 more times before picking up on the third ring. She asked if it was true that I had purchased an expensive new car, and I confirmed that I had. She then questioned how I could afford it after I had been laid off. I inquired when she thought I had been laid off, and she seemed perplexed because she had assumed I had lost my job. I explained that I could afford the car due to my recent promotion. After a moment of silence, she suddenly exclaimed her congratulations and suggested we celebrate that evening. Confused, I reminded her of her earlier statement about our marriage being pointless and her desire to leave. She stuttered, attempting to come up with excuses, but I assured her it was all right and that I was fine celebrating alone. When she insisted on seeing me, I hesitated, explaining that it didn't seem wise considering her earlier feelings about our marriage. I believed she should stand by her initial decision. In response, she called me heartless and accused me of never loving her. She burst into tears and abruptly hung up, leaving me wondering if I was wrong for my actions. Was I wrong to distance myself from her, especially considering her sudden interest in my life, seemingly sparked by my new car and promotion? It has been 2 days since my last post, and things have taken an unexpected turn. My wife has completely changed her demeanor, shifting from indifference to intense concern about my well-being. She has bombarded my phone with calls and texts, ranging from threats of divorce to accusations of infidelity. I found myself surprised at her sudden interest in my actions, considering her previous lack of concern. She expressed a desire to come home, but I stood my ground, reminding her that she was the one who chose to leave. I couldn't understand why she expected me to beg her to return. I firmly stated that I shouldn't have to fight for our marriage alone, as marriage is a partnership, and I didn't make those vows alone before the priests. I reminded her that she was the one who essentially declared our marriage was over and had reached its end, not me. I refused to stay in a marriage with someone who expressed such sentiments. I told her plainly that I wouldn't engage in conversations if all she intended to do was complain like a spoiled child. Of course, she didn't appreciate my bluntness and hung up on me. It's been a week and a half since the last update, and I'm seriously considering filing for divorce. Initially, I contemplated filing for separation, hoping to spare her from embarrassment, until she created the scene at my family dinner. I had invited her, giving her a chance to attend without informing my family about our living situation. I wanted to shield her from her recent inappropriate behavior and decisions. However, during the dinner, as we discussed various topics, I complimented my mom for her unwavering support for my dad, especially since he was currently using crutches due to a broken leg. My wife chose that moment to interject, expressing her desire for me to be as supportive as my parents were for each other. Fed up, I confronted her, asking if I was a bad husband simply because I didn't cater to her every whim or because I wasn't constantly pleading for her return. In front of my family, I revealed how she had been mistreating me, assuming I had lost my job without discussing it with me first. I shared how she had moved out, claiming our marriage was pointless and practically over. When my family questioned her, she tried to turn the situation around, suggesting she was trying to salvage our marriage. But I had been mistreating her ever since my promotion. I pointed out that she only wanted the marriage now because I was making significantly more money, and she wanted to enjoy the benefits. She began crying, portraying herself as the victim, and accused me of trying to leave her for a younger woman. My parents became upset, thinking I was pushing her out to make room for someone else due to my recent promotion. I chuckled and handed them my phone so they could see our text messages and understand the truth of the situation. Up until 2 months ago, she had been treating me horribly, speaking to me in a way that my sisters were ready to confront her about. When she tried to paint me as the villain in front of my parents, I was furious. That moment, I told her I was completely done with her. I reminded her about the marital agreement we had signed. I made it clear that since she had made the first move to dissolve the marriage by moving out and expressing her exhaustion with our relationship the following day, she was entitled to nothing. Despite her desperate pleas for another chance, I was ready for it to be over. I wanted to move on and find someone who valued me for who I am, not for my money. She was delusional for thinking she could leave me, try to guilt-trip me into taking her back, and then expect everything to be okay. I'm glad you're looking at this situation positively and choosing to move forward without her. It's evident that her effort only increased because you got a promotion. You deserve someone who appreciates you for who you are, not for your success. As for my own struggles, I've always found it challenging to pay attention and focus on things I find boring. Managing deadlines, waking up, and falling asleep have always been difficult for me, and my memory is incredibly weak. Somehow, I managed to get through high school and even secured a spot in my dream university, although I felt it was more due to luck than my efforts. I often skipped classes at the community college, using excuses to mask the fact that I was sleeping in. This behavior made me feel awful about myself, fearing that if anyone discovered my laziness, they would hate me and think I was a failure. My self-esteem took a severe hit, and I developed imposter syndrome, general anxiety disorder, and an eating disorder due to my self-loathing. When university started, it became even harder to maintain my grades. Despite my best efforts, I kept missing deadlines, struggled to pay attention in class, and found it nearly impossible to focus on my studies. I tried everything: attending learning skill classes, reading every self-help book, locking myself in my dorm room, but I still felt like I was falling short academically. I was at an all-time low mentally until I stumbled upon an article about ADHD that felt like it was narrating my life story. Every little symptom described seemed to fit me perfectly. This discovery gave me newfound hope that I could get help. Fortunately, I was still covered by my parents' insurance. I promptly consulted a neurologist, which cost me $50, a detail that might become significant later on. The neurologist confirmed it was a classic case of ADHD and also diagnosed a memory problem. He provided me with a comprehensive treatment plan, including medication. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and validation. Yesterday, I took half a pill for the first time, and it was a transformative experience. It was as if someone had turned off a loud noise that I hadn't even realized was there. I'd never felt so focused and calm in my entire life. Excited, I called my family to share the news. However, my mom abruptly interrupted me, asking me to bring her some pills when I got home. My father chimed in, suggesting that my 16-year-old brother, who likely had a more severe case of ADHD than mine, should try them too, as he was struggling to maintain his grades. I was deeply uncomfortable with their request and suggested they consult a doctor themselves since it wasn't expensive and the wait times weren't long. But they brushed it off, insisting that ADHD medication was common nowadays, with people obtaining them from friends. And if it worked so well for me, why wouldn't I want the same for them? They claimed I was being overly uptight and making a fuss out of nothing. I'm torn because I understand people often share these medications, but I'm worried about the legality and potential consequences. Additionally, I fear running out when I need them, which might sound selfish. I want to emphasize that my brother is completely unaware of this situation and is the sweetest young boy who would never pressure anyone for anything. I want to express my gratitude to everyone for their supportive comments. I wish I could respond to each one individually, but please know that I've read them all. Your positivity has genuinely made my day and helped me feel better about my situation. Thank you for your kindness. I want to clarify that I never seriously considered sharing the medication. My post was more about my conflicted feelings regarding their request. Under no circumstances should you give away your prescription meds. ADHD medications are controlled substances, and running out before the prescribed time could lead to suspicion of illegal activity. Selling them or sharing them with family members could get you into serious trouble. If you fear someone might steal them, consider using a lockbox. It's unwise to share prescription medications. Your family members should consult a doctor for their own diagnosis and treatments. Introducing new medications without supervision might lead to harmful interactions. A couple of months before my grandmother passed away, I drove down to see her with my dad. Despite my initial belief that she disliked me due to my past mistakes, she gave me her wedding ring among other things, mentioning that I was her light and always there for her without being asked. During my visit, I learned about my grandfather's infidelity, and I assumed she gave me the ring instead of leaving it for him because she wanted him to have someone after her passing. I facilitated a reconciliation, but after her death, my cousin asked me to return the ring to my grandfather. I refused, believing that if she intended him to have it, she would have left it for him. Am I in the wrong here? Morally, you're not at fault. It was a gift freely given. However, you might want to check the legalities in your area, as sometimes gifts given shortly before death can be contested as part of the inheritance. Be prepared for relatives to try to guilt you into giving it back. But remember, your grandmother's intentions matter, and it's not your responsibility to fulfill someone else's assumptions about her relationship with your grandfather. I made the decision to allow my parents to live in the house, but when Mark, who can't even cook, had the audacity to suggest I leave, I couldn't believe it. He approached me with a smile, as if he had achieved something significant, and said something so outrageous that it left me speechless. I could never allow my parents to live in my house, only for Mark to try moving in with my in-laws without my permission and attempt to evict me, the rightful owner. Mark's controlling nature had bothered me for a while, but now it felt sickening. I couldn't continue this way with him. His entitled attitude and the way he behaved as if he owned the house, despite not contributing financially, had worn me down. I am Sarah, a woman in my 40s, and I work hard to support our family. Mark, my husband, stays at home and takes care of household chores. While I appreciate his contributions, his domineering personality had become unbearable. His demands, like asking me to fetch ice cream late at night, grated on my nerves. When I refused, he threatened me, reminding me of his supposed authority as the husband. His constant need to assert his dominance and demand respect solely based on his gender infuriated me. Dealing with his behavior on top of my demanding job felt unbearable. I finally told him, I'm really tired. I had reached my breaking point and couldn't continue living like this. I decided to retreat to my room for some rest, seeking solace from the mounting tension with Mark. However, he wasn't pleased with my attitude and confronted me, demanding an explanation for my behavior towards him. Threats loomed in his words, his anger palpable as he asserted his authority over me. Feeling utterly drained, I mustered a forced smile and apologized, hoping he would understand my exhaustion. But Mark's disappointment in me only grew, leaving me no energy to argue. I apologized once more and withdrew to my room, my spirit crushed by his overbearing behavior. Day by day, I endured Mark's tyranny, worn down by his constant demands. My breaking point came when I fell severely ill, diagnosed with a stress-induced fever. Unable to move, I had to take a day off work, lying in bed, too weak to care for myself. When I told Mark about my condition, he dismissed it, accusing me of making excuses and refusing to help. Alone in my room, feverish and weak, I endured a night of unbearable pain. In my delirium, I wished for an end to my suffering. I longed for a simple gesture of care from Mark, a cold compress, or even just a comforting word. But my desires remained unmet, leaving me drowning in a sea of loneliness and self-doubt. Questions plagued my mind. Why was I the only one subjected to this torment? What had I done to deserve such treatment? The agony of my situation, coupled with Mark's callousness, weighed heavily on my soul, pushing me to the brink of despair. I couldn't help but wonder why things couldn't just work out with Mark. The pain from my ongoing ordeal brought me to tears, and when my fever finally subsided after 3 days of rest, I had to return to work. My colleagues and bosses showed genuine concern, asking if I was truly all right. Their kindness contrasted sharply with Mark's attitude, and their compassion moved me to tears. I felt I was reaching my emotional breaking point. A voice inside me screamed that I couldn't endure Mark any longer. I knew deep down that pushing myself so hard wasn't sustainable, that someday I would reach my limit. Yet, in my overwhelmed state, I couldn't gather the strength to confront the situation or contemplate preparing for a life without Mark. My affection for him had long faded, but the complexities of our shared life left me feeling trapped. Each day, I worked tirelessly, returning home only to be tossed around by Mark's whims. This cycle persisted, draining me both physically and emotionally. Then, one day, while I was trying to find solace in my room, Mark summoned me. It had been ages since we had a serious conversation, and his unusual excitement piqued my curiosity. As I settled down for the discussion, Mark, with a fervor I hadn't seen before, dropped a bombshell. He intended to let his parents live in our house. His callous remark about my inability to cook stung, but what struck me even harder was his plan to force me out. I couldn't fathom the selfishness behind his words. Mark, without considering my feelings, proceeded to outline his agenda. He wanted to change the house's ownership to include his parents, divorce me, and start a new family. He declared that these decisions were final and that my objections wouldn't change a thing. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, unable to comprehend the decisions he'd made without any regard for my emotions. When I broached the idea of living together, my parents were elated. They must have missed me dearly. It was my responsibility to be there for them as the man of the house. However, Mark, consumed by his own desires, arrogantly embraced the term man of the house, utterly oblivious to my feelings. I knew I couldn't continue this way with him. It was simply impossible. Mark chuckled dismissively, claiming that my love for him blinded me. He apologized insincerely, asserting that he only wanted to take care of his family. But I had no affection left for him. All that remained was my astonishment at his selfishness and my regret for not ending things sooner. I despised my past weakness for allowing him to take advantage of me. Why hadn't I cut ties with him earlier? If I had, he wouldn't have exploited me so ruthlessly or displayed such selfish arrogance. Mark seemed to misunderstand, assuming my reluctance for divorce meant lingering love. To clarify my feelings, I declared, "I'll leave then." Mark, clearly unprepared for my agreement to a divorce and my willingness to leave, was stunned. He had to brace himself for the challenging times ahead. The past version of me, always bailing him out, was no more. From now on, no matter what happened to Mark, I wouldn't offer my help, for we wouldn't be a couple anymore. Mark stared at me in shock, frozen in place, providing me with the perfect opportunity to head to my room and pack the essentials. Larger items would have to be left behind. Today, it seemed evident that I needed to hire movers soon. As I prepared to leave, Mark approached me hastily, questioning my decision. "Are you sure about this? If we divorce, we'll be strangers," he said. I responded with a serene smile. "I've already fallen out of love with you. Letting go of what's not needed feels liberating." My words hung in the air, leaving Mark looking utterly lost. I nodded, thanking him for everything, and walked away from our house. Back at my parents' place, I explained the situation to them. Their initial fury at Mark's behavior subsided when they realized I had a plan. With their support, I started my recovery process. The first step was the divorce. After sending the papers, Mark messaged me, expressing uncertainty about the situation. I clarified my feelings, and he went silent. A few days later, I received the completed divorce papers from him, promptly filled out my parts, and submitted them to the county office. Now, Mark and I were complete strangers. I no longer had the responsibility of supporting the household as his wife. During the divorce, we divided our assets. Mark claimed the house, a burden to me from the start, so I gladly gave it up. Instead, I opted for alimony since Mark wasn't working. His parents covered it, but he seemed to be actively job hunting, probably planning to repay them once he found stable employment. However, reality had a way of challenging even the best-laid plans. A month passed since the divorce was finalized, and I moved into a new home, enjoying a peaceful life. Then, I received a call from Mark. Annoyance bubbled within me, but ignoring him might create more problems. So, for the sake of my own future, I decided it was time to address the situation. "Hello, what do you want after all this time?" I answered the phone, my patience worn thin from dealing with Mark. His desperate plea for help barely registered as I urged him to get to the point. "Please, help me," he implored. His tone, though desperate, only elicited a cynical laugh from me. I anticipated Mark being in a tough situation, but the severity of his predicament surprised me. "Well, what happened?" "Oh, you have to tell me or I won't know, lol." Though I had a hunch about Mark's troubles, I wanted him to confess the details himself. Reluctantly, he began to explain, stumbling over his words. He had taken over the house I used to live in, managing fine for a month. However, he recently struggled to pay the rent since he was still unemployed. Thinking my former parents-in-law, who lived on a pension, could cover the expense, he asked them for help. But the bill turned out to be much higher than they expected. Around $1,800. My retired in-laws, living frugally, couldn't afford such an amount. Furious and blaming Mark, they confronted him. Lost and unsure, Mark reached out to me, tears in his voice, asking for assistance. Despite the frustration bubbling within me, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction seeing him face the consequences of his actions. He blamed me, venting his frustration about my lack of warning regarding the rent. I acknowledged my mistake, but reminded him that his ignorance about the monthly cost was entirely his own doing. He had treated me like an outsider and pushed me away, and now he was reaping the consequences. Sighing at his audacity, I listened as he continued, his plea for help persisting, seemingly oblivious to my feelings. "I need your help. We can't go on like this." Mark's voice carried a sense of urgency, highlighting their desperate situation. It was evident they felt cornered. I surmised that the rent due date had likely passed, and they might already be behind, considering the infamously short temper of the house owner. I remembered the stern warnings about never being late with rent payments while I lived there. Missing a payment could result in dire consequences, as Mark, having met the landlord, was well aware of. His plea for assistance was desperate, asking me to cover the rent for just 1 month. "I don't have anyone else to turn to. You still care about me, right?" Mark's words were laced with selfishness, expecting me to help just because we were once married. I wanted to tell him that my feelings for him had long faded, but I held my tongue. Instead, I coldly replied, "I'm sorry, but do I have any obligation to help you? You were the one who left me. Isn't it too convenient for you to seek my help now?" Mark attempted to defend himself, pleading for understanding. "Please don't be so cold. I really can't do this without you. Whether you still love me or not doesn't matter now. We used to be married. Can't you help me out just this once?" "No," I stated firmly, my patience wearing thin. "It's been a long time since I stopped loving you. You left me, and even before that, my feelings for you had already cooled." My response carried the weight of frustration and despair that had built up inside me over time. When I uttered those words, I could hear Mark's dejected voice on the other end of the phone. It hit me like a tidal wave of disbelief. For so long, I endured everything: his selfishness, his taking me for granted, his mistreatment, and even stood by him when I was unwell, all in an attempt to salvage our marriage. I had invested my efforts into making our life together work. But this was the outcome. The question that haunted me was why I hadn't left sooner. Why I hadn't distanced myself from Mark when my love for him had faded. Regret flooded in, mingling with the anger I felt towards him. Throughout our time together, Mark never truly faced me. He never showed concern, never tried to protect me, and never considered walking through life hand in hand as a couple. Every time he treated me like a mere maid or a money-making machine, he remained oblivious to my despair. Yet despite all this being a result of Mark's actions, he had the audacity to plead for my help as if he were the victim. His attitude felt so self-centered that it was nauseating. "Please help me, I'm begging you. How about we get married again? This time, we'll start over properly. I promise I'll never kick you out again," he said in desperation. I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly at his desperate proposal. "Remarried to you? Are you kidding me? All of this is the result of your own actions. I've tried to work with you in my own way for a long, long time. I kept trying to make you face me. Now you're telling me to start all over again with you, pretending that none of that ever happened. Do you want me to go back to those hellish days? That would never happen. I'm not going back to that life. No matter what, I exclaimed, my emotions boiling over. Tears began to flow, a mix of anger and sadness. Mark remained silent in response to my words. Unable to bear any more of this conversation, I simply said goodbye and hung up. After that, Mark didn't call, and wanting never to hear his voice again, I blocked his number. Later, I heard from mutual friends that Mark and his family got evicted from their home. In his own way, Mark tried to talk to my former in-laws and get them to pay the rent on his behalf. However, they were furious, stating, "That's not what we talked about," and refused. Consequently, they angered the landlord and had no choice but to leave. Mark hadn't had much luck finding a full-time job, so he was working part-time to make ends meet. Apparently, because they had been living together, my former in-laws had to sell their house and were now cramped in a rundown apartment, all three of them. As for me, I became engrossed in my work. My boss even discussed a promotion with me. It seemed I might be the first female manager in our company, and I received admiration from both colleagues and juniors. Sometimes friends asked, "Are you going to get married?" To be honest, after being forced into that kind of life, I had a negative view of marriage. The idea of dating a man or getting married again didn't appeal to me, but life was long, and there was no need to rush. In this generation, many people go their entire lives without getting married. If I could live my life without regrets, that's all that mattered. If I could live true to myself, that was enough. With that in mind, I wanted to continue walking through life at my own pace. I'm a 31-year-old man who has been married to my wife, a 27-year-old woman, for nearly 3 years. We've been living together even before tying the knot, and our marriage has generally been a happy one. I've never questioned her loyalty because I've never had a reason to. We've had our fair share of disagreements, but nothing extreme. I was confident that if my wife were ever unhappy, she would communicate it to me. So it hit me like a ton of bricks when I stumbled upon a series of overly friendly messages on her phone one day. Her phone was on the dining table, and I had picked it up to bring it to her bedroom as she had requested. A notification lit up the screen, and I couldn't help but glance at it. There were messages from someone named Kara, and they were of a highly personal nature. I didn't know anyone named Kara, and the nature of those texts immediately raised my suspicions. I brought her the phone in the bedroom, and when she opened it, she asked if I had seen her notifications. I lied and said no, but she mentioned that it was just a notification for a kid's game and that she felt embarrassed I had seen it. I assured her that I hadn't seen anything and left her to her phone. However, I couldn't help but study her expressions because my doubts were now eating at me. She continued to text Kara with a smile on her face, which only fueled my unease. Unable to shake off my suspicions, I eventually left the room and told her I'd be sleeping in the living room, citing some work I needed to finish. She didn't even look up from her phone when I grabbed a pillow and headed to the couch. Restlessness consumed me as I couldn't stop thinking about those messages and the worst-case scenarios that were playing out in my mind. I had never considered the possibility that she would cheat on me, but now I had my doubts. I let it go that night, but the nagging feeling persisted. I began checking her phone whenever the opportunity arose. I needed to put my mind at ease to know the truth. I wanted desperately for it to be untrue. But then, one day, I saw another text from Kara. It contained a time and place, along with nicknames and emojis that resembled a date plan. I knew I should have confronted her, but I was so furious about her potentially ruining our seemingly perfect marriage that a simple confrontation didn't feel like enough. Instead, I decided to go to the specified place at the designated time. She arrived a bit late, and right in front of the cafe, she kissed the guy. A hello kiss, but a kiss nonetheless. It was the kind of kiss you give your husband when you return from work. I recognized the guy. He was her colleague. I had met him a couple of times when picking my wife up from her office. I knew his name, and I knew for a fact that he was married. I was torn between wanting to storm over and confront them both, to cry my heart out, and maintaining my composure. I chose the latter, hoping to give her a taste of her own medicine. I bided my time, and it was excruciating to be in the same house as her, eating dinner together, sharing a bed, and engaging in conversations about anything while I knew she was betraying me. But I remained patient, determined not to let her get away with it so easily. Our tradition of hosting game nights with friends every other month was the perfect opportunity to carry out my plan, and I organized everything, just as we always did. She was always competitive at games, so our game nights were something she looked forward to eagerly. When everyone arrived, we started playing Pictionary. In the midst of the game, just before it was her turn, I slipped a note into the jar. As she picked it up, her expression shifted from joy to confusion, and then embarrassment within seconds. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, and in that moment, I decided to reveal everything I knew right there in front of our friends. Everyone was taken aback because, like me, they hadn't anticipated such a revelation from my wife. She pleaded with me to let her explain, and reluctantly, I agreed, curious about what excuse she would conjure. Through tears, she claimed I was jumping to conclusions, asserting that she was merely friends with her colleague. I remained calm, insisting she pack her bags and leave. Her demeanor changed swiftly. She admitted her mistake, but insisted it was unintentional. I couldn't fathom how infidelity could just happen without neglecting your spouse, but at least she acknowledged it. I calmly told her to leave, unable to bear her presence in my home any longer. I'd also informed her that I intended to speak to her colleague's wife, because he couldn't escape consequences either. Our friends, sympathetic to my situation, tried to console her. Despite my anger, I didn't want her to face this alone. Some friends offered her their guest rooms for the night, but she opted for a hotel. She accused me of humiliating her in front of everyone, insisting we talk when we were both calmer. Reluctantly, I agreed, even though I had little patience for her lies and fabrications at that moment. After she left, she persistently tried to contact me, but I ignored most of her calls and messages. I needed time to gather my thoughts. My wife had unraveled into a mess within a month. I did talk to her colleague's wife, who, too, had suspected her husband's infidelity. She revealed her plans to divorce him and suggested I do the same. I agreed, but it was far from easy. I had loved my wife for a long time, and we had been happy. We didn't have significant issues in our marriage, and yet she had chosen to betray us. About 2 weeks later, my wife, now living in a hotel, begged me to let her in and hear her out. I reluctantly allowed her inside, and she immediately burst into tears. She professed her love for me and admitted her mistake. When I asked how long the affair had been going on, she confessed it had lasted a year. My heart shattered, but my sorrow quickly turned to rage. I couldn't fathom why she had destroyed our otherwise happy marriage. She couldn't provide a single reason for her actions. She insisted on giving our marriage a second chance, but I was done. I told her to leave and not to contact me for a while. I needed time to think, to sort through the chaos she had caused. It's been 6 months since I asked my wife to leave. We've met a couple of times since, during which she apologized profusely, begging me not to divorce her. I was torn because I still loved her deeply. Ending our marriage was the right thing to do after her betrayal, but I couldn't find it in myself to move forward. Our marriage was in limbo. We lived separately, hardly speaking. I knew I had to end it officially because I couldn't trust her anymore. The trust I had once placed in her was irreparably shattered. She kept assuring me she wouldn't repeat her mistake, urging me to trust her again. I was considering giving her another chance when I received an email from her colleague's now ex-wife. She claimed my wife and her ex-husband were still in contact. I desperately hoped she was wrong, hoping my wife couldn't be that cruel. I asked my wife to meet, and, as usual, she began with apologies. I confronted her about her ongoing communication with the man she had the affair with. She hesitated, And in that moment, I knew the truth. I urged her to be honest, and she confessed they had spoken when he was going through his divorce. She insisted they were just friends, but the little trust I had left vanished. With that admission, I realized I could never trust her again. There was no point in staying in a marriage where trust and unconditional love were lost. I informed her to expect divorce papers soon. She could take anything she still had in the house. Despite her tears and pleas, there was no other option. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, relieved to finally end the turmoil, but saddened by the loss of what was once a loving relationship. Thankfully, we didn't have children. It made the process a little less painful. She left quietly, and although I didn't care if she went back to that man, I needed to let her go to move on with my life. I should be informed beforehand and not find out when I walk through the door. I expressed my concerns, feeling unsettled about the situation. My wife seemed dismissive, telling me I was overreacting and that my brother needed a place to stay temporarily. The next day, I decided to have a conversation with my wife about boundaries. I explained that while I understood she wanted to help my brother, I needed to be part of the decision-making process, especially when it involved our home. She countered, saying that it was just a temporary situation, and I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. I insisted that communication and mutual respect were essential in our relationship, and that decisions like these should be made together. As the discussion continued, my wife became defensive, insisting that she was just being supportive and didn't see the need for my involvement. I emphasized the importance of boundaries in maintaining a healthy marriage and family dynamic. We talked through our concerns, trying to find a compromise that respected both our relationship and my brother's situation. In the end, we agreed that in the future, we would discuss such matters before making decisions that affected our home life. While my initial reaction might have been perceived as an overreaction, the conversation allowed us to establish clearer boundaries and strengthen our communication as a couple. I firmly believed that I should have been the one to decide whether my brother stayed over. He had no right to call my wife and intrude without my consent. I insisted that he should have waited for my call, and I planned to talk to him about it in the morning. However, my wife brushed off my concerns, telling me to grow up and accept that he was always welcome in our home. Now my wife is furious with me, and I find myself stuck with my brother in the house, unsure of how long he'll be staying until he figures out his life. Already having 2 teenagers, I felt overwhelmed having another person, especially my adult brother, residing with us. I stood my ground, believing that he shouldn't be here, but my wife remained upset with me. Am I the jerk for asserting that she shouldn't have picked up my brother and allowed him to stay at our house? Update. I don't believe it makes me a bad person to think that an 18-year-old should be independent and not rely on family support. I expect the same for my children. They are supposed to have a job and save money to move out after graduating from high school. If they go to college, they can stay, but they are expected to pay for it themselves and contribute a small amount in rent. My wife doesn't agree with this and believes our children can stay as long as they need. I'm trying to help her see reason. As a child, I was never taken to zoos, museums, or out to eat. I went to a public school and wasn't allowed to participate in sports or activities due to financial constraints. I had to get a job as soon as I could. My parents were 16 when they had me, and even when they got older and had more money, I still didn't receive the opportunities my brother had. My brother received the best, while I got nothing. It's time for him to stand on his own. Yes, my children enjoyed activities like going to the zoo, parks, and museums, as well as participating in sports. However, those privileges were for my kids, not my brother. I couldn't understand why my wife would include him in these experiences. My brother has always regarded her as another mother, so I had to share her with him. Last night, when I got home from work, everyone was preparing for dinner. After the meal, I asked my kids to go to their rooms so I could talk to my brother and wife. I questioned my brother about his presence and why he felt the need to involve us instead of dealing with his issues independently. He explained that he needed to escape his home environment. He had just discovered that his girlfriend had cheated on him and was planning to leave. She blamed him for not marrying her or having a baby, which she desired deeply. I told my wife that what she wanted wasn't unreasonable and that my brother was being immature. I argued that if he could live with his girlfriend, he could marry her. My wife countered, saying that not everyone wants to be married and have children at such a young age, reminding me that he was an adult who needed to grow up. I expressed my displeasure with them making decisions without me and explained that this situation could have been resolved the next morning. There was no need for anyone to drive 2 hours or run away from home. I inquired when my brother planned on leaving, and he informed me that his girlfriend was moving out by Sunday, after which he would go back home. He still had 2 months left on the lease, so he intended to look for a smaller place to move into. I shared my reservations about him staying for that extended period, but my wife defended him, insisting he was my brother and a few days wouldn't hurt anyone. Reluctantly, I agreed, although I made it clear that I didn't like it. I felt cornered and uncomfortable with the situation, but I didn't want to make a bigger issue out of it. I still believed he needed to go home and deal with his problems independently. My brother thanked me, and we parted ways. My wife and I continued to discuss the matter, both feeling discontented with one another. "You're the jerk," she said. "He's an adult." Then another person chimed in, "Or are you leaving out a ton of info? You have some minor points. I don't like people staying at my house either, but it isn't just your house, and it's family. You didn't specify that there was a horrible drama or anything. Your post comes off as controlling and unpleasant." The discussion continued, with varying opinions. Some believed I was in the wrong, while others saw my point of view. It was clear that this situation had caused tension between my wife and me. The situation turned grim in 2020 when I lost my job due to having to homeschool our kids. We couldn't afford the rent, and 6 months later, we were evicted. My mother-in-law, who initially offered us 2 bedrooms, withdrew her support as soon as we became homeless. For 4 months, we lived out of our van with our kids until a homeless shelter opened up. During this time, both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law distanced themselves from us, showing little compassion. Despite our efforts to reach out, we were met with judgment from sister-in-law, who received her house after her father's passing and hadn't paid taxes in years. We were criticized for our life choices and were made to feel like failures because we were over 30, had 3 kids, and were struggling. Fast forward, we managed to turn things around drastically. We built a house from scratch, involving our kids, and gained invaluable experience. The outcome was perfect. Our kids were overjoyed to have participated in building their own home. We also started our own business, achieving this success without any help from my husband's family, despite their broken promises. Throughout this journey, I couldn't help but develop a bitter resentment toward them due to their lack of support. Recently, my mother-in-law, who is facing eviction herself after losing her retirement benefits, approached us asking to stay in our home if she became homeless. My initial reaction was to laugh at her audacity. My husband stood by my side, showing his resentment toward her for abandoning us in our time of need. She left offended, and later, sister-in-law criticized us, labeling us as trash for not allowing her soon-to-be evicted elderly mother to move in. I suggested a nearby nursing home for her instead. While some friends said my response was harsh, considering the way they treated us, I don't believe I am the jerk in this situation. Their lack of support when we needed it has created a chasm, and I find it hard to extend a helping hand now. "Oh, I messed up really bad and now I'm scared. You can call me Cindy, and I'm 23 years old. My boyfriend, Cameron, is 25. We're both from this tiny town in Oklahoma. We kind of knew each other because he was a bit older, but we weren't close. Around 3 years ago, we started talking more when he came back from college. He'd visit the grocery store where I worked. I was a cashier, and he'd always come to my line. He was always so nice and polite. I tried dropping hints that I liked him, but he didn't seem to get it. One day, when my line was slow, I finally got the courage to talk to him. I asked about his major, and we ended up chatting for about 10 minutes. He finally realized I was interested and gave me his number. I called him right after work, and we talked for hours. We went out to dinner that night and just clicked. We fell in love that weekend. Crazy, right? We started seeing each other every weekend. After he graduated, he got a great job in the city, bought a cool car, and got a nice apartment. A few months later, he asked me to move in with him. Even though our parents weren't thrilled about it, they supported us. Cameron said it was a test to see if we could handle living together before marriage. I was so happy. Living in the city was amazing. We both found good jobs, and I loved working at a coffee shop near our place. We made friends, and life was fun. We'd been living together for about 9 months when we started looking at other apartments just to see what else was out there. I also joined a yoga class nearby. There was this guy, Ed, who was always at the coffee shop and also came to the yoga class. He was older, in his late 40s, and really friendly. He was successful, drove a nice car, and dressed well. I got curious about yoga because he seemed so passionate about it, and I decided to talk to him one day. I asked Ed if he recommended the yoga studio he went to, and he said it's a good idea. So I decided to check it out myself. It was near our apartment, which was great. On the other hand, Cameron, my boyfriend, used a gym near his office, but it was far away and sometimes took forever to get there. I started going to yoga classes and really enjoyed them. After work, around 2 p.m., I'd head to the studio. This fit perfectly with my work schedule. I'd work from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., then do yoga until 3:30 p.m. After that, I'd go home and prepare dinner for Cameron. One day, Ed, the guy from the coffee shop and yoga class, asked how I liked the studio. I told him I loved it and thanked him for the recommendation. He mentioned that he might join classes around that time, particularly hot yoga, which started at 1:30 p.m. He also said he went to the gym for weightlifting and boxing a few days a week. A couple of days later, I bumped into Ed at the yoga studio. We talked like we always did at the coffee shop. Somehow, he convinced me to try a hot yoga class. I gave it a shot, and it turned out I really liked it. We started spending more time together, going to classes and stuff. Looking back, it wasn't the best idea. But at the time, I didn't really think about it. This went on for a few weeks until one day, I can't explain why, Ed and I ended up at Cameron's apartment on a Thursday afternoon. We made a terrible mistake, something I deeply regret now. I felt so guilty about it, but Ed suggested we meet at his place the following Monday to avoid disrespecting Cameron. Ed's apartment was in a dodgy neighborhood, sparsely furnished with just a few old chairs, a TV, a small table with 2 chairs, a simple double bed, and an old dresser. It wasn't what I expected, and I wished I had left in hindsight. But I didn't want to be rude. It turned out that Ed wasn't as well off as I thought. He spent his money on his car, clothes, and jewelry, not his living space. Afterward, I told Ed we needed to end our relationship because I loved my boyfriend and didn't want to mess up what we had. Ed cynically laughed and said, "You can't possibly love your boyfriend if you did what you did, can you?" I insisted that I did love Cameron, but Ed said my desire for him outweighed my feelings for Cameron by far. It was a harsh reality check for me. I gathered my stuff and left Ed's apartment, feeling tainted and incredibly foolish for what happened. It wasn't like me at all. I promise it's not. I can't explain why I did this with Ed. It happened during a time of the month when my hormones often feel uncontrollable. Though that's not an excuse. I'm just trying to make sense of my actions. I spent the rest of that day in tears until Cameron came home. We had dinner, watched TV, and relaxed, but Cameron seemed distant. He'd been feeling unwell, so I assumed it was because of that. On Tuesday, he still seemed off and distant. We hadn't been intimate for almost a week, which was unusual for us. Looking back, I think he might have known about Ed and me, which is why he was keeping his distance. On Wednesday, I got home just before 3 p.m., but my apartment key was missing from my key ring. I panicked, thinking it had broken off somehow, but all my other keys were still there. Then it hit me, Cameron had taken the apartment key. I tried calling and texting him, but there was no response. which was strange because he usually sent a quick text even when he was busy. I decided to go to the apartment office and ask for help. They had keys to all the apartments, so I explained my situation to one of the coordinators. They took me into the manager's office and closed the door. After a few minutes, they called me back in and asked me to sit down. The manager told me something shocking. Cameron had moved out that morning and left a letter to terminate the lease after its one-year term. I couldn't believe it. I was devastated. They showed me the bags he left for me in their office, filled with my stuff and gifts I had bought for him over the years. It hit me that he must have known about Ed and me, and I fell apart in front of these kind ladies. They helped me carry the bags to my car and offered me water, snacks, and tissues. I sat in my car for over an hour, crying and trying to figure out what to do. I attempted to reach Cameron through calls and messages, but he didn't respond. I thought about staying in the vacant apartment until the lease ended, but he didn't reply to that either. I knew he was angry, but he hadn't blocked my calls, which gave me a glimmer of hope. I considered going to his office to talk to him, but I didn't want to cause a scene and risk his job. Instead, I drove around aimlessly for a while, unsure of where to go. Eventually, I checked into a hotel near our apartment, even though I couldn't afford it for long. I spent the night crying, wondering how Cameron had found out the truth. I hoped it was because Ed had told him, not because of hidden cameras in our apartment. The shame I felt was overwhelming. The next day, my mom called, furious after talking to Cameron's mother. She demanded to know what had happened, and I confessed. She yelled and screamed at me for over 45 minutes before hanging up abruptly. My dad expressed his deep disappointment in me too. I asked if I could move back home, and he agreed, but only if I sought professional help, like therapy. I accepted his condition, apologized again, and returned home 11 days later. During this time, I kept trying to contact Cameron, but he never replied. I read some advice suggesting that it's best to give a betrayed partner some space, even though it was tearing me apart inside. When I returned home, it felt like everyone in town knew about our breakup and why it happened. It was a total nightmare. I'm not sure how to reconcile with Cameron. I'm afraid he might never want to talk to me again. I love him deeply, and I know I have to try my best to win him back. No matter what happens, I'll carry the regret of my actions for the rest of my life. I'm back home now, living with my parents, and I've taken a job as a cashier at a dollar store. It seems like everyone in town is still talking about me, and I can't help feeling incredibly embarrassed. People somehow found out that Ed was the person I cheated with, and they did some online research. To my shock, I discovered that Ed is actually 62 years old, not in his late 40s as I thought. Even worse, he has a criminal record going back 17 years, with articles about his past arrests and trials still available online. I could have easily found all this information with a simple online search, but I was too distracted to do so. I still find it hard to believe how I acted during that time. I feel like a complete fool. Not only did I betray the man I love, but I did it with someone who's far from admirable. I hope the town's gossip will die down in a few months because I can't bear living here much longer. It's taking a heavy toll on my mental well-being. Some days, I contemplate locking myself in my room and not facing the world. My parents are deeply embarrassed by my actions, and they've made it clear that if I ever repeat something like this, they'll disown me without hesitation. They believe I've brought profound shame to the family, which has only intensified my feelings of self-disgust. I've been dealing with severe depression as a result. Throughout this entire ordeal, Cameron has not reached out to me. We haven't exchanged a single word since the night he locked me out of the apartment. I just wish he would pick up the phone and express his anger or any emotion. At this point, all I want is to apologize to him face to face. I've been in therapy for a couple of weeks now, and it's been helpful. My therapist is compassionate but also straightforward. Following her advice, I've refrained from trying to contact Cameron and have started focusing on self-improvement. She pointed out that I've already extended my apologies through text and voicemail, and Cameron is aware of it. But evidently, he wants nothing to do with me at the moment. Over the past week, I've concentrated on my job, maintained a healthy diet, gotten enough rest, and taken long walks. I do feel better, but I still miss my partner. I'm taking each day as it comes, hoping for a reconciliation with Cameron, but also preparing for the possibility that it may not happen. I have no intentions of dating anyone anytime soon, despite receiving requests from 4 customers at the store. My heart and mind are still firmly under Cameron's influence. I don't anticipate providing any further updates unless we manage to reunite. Best wishes, and thank you to all of you. I didn't get paid for my work, but we lived rent-free on our property, and I knew I'd inherit the majority ownership. It was a perfect family setup, and we all loved living here. My oldest was a 21-year-old girl, followed by a 20-year-old boy, a 17-year-old boy, and our youngest, a 15-year-old girl. Life was great, and my marriage with Connie was loving and happy. My job was good, and the farm was thriving. But about 3 years ago, my brother Bill got diagnosed with cancer. He didn't take care of himself well and only sought treatment when his symptoms got unbearable. He went through tough treatments, but he kept working. Sadly, Bill passed away earlier this year, and it was very emotional for all of us. Bill and I were close, and I helped him with various challenges he faced in life. Despite his issues, we loved him unconditionally. In Bill's will, he named me as the executor and left me 100% of his assets, including a bank account with over $70,000. I found something strange, though. Bill had set up this account with my youngest son, Joe, as the beneficiary. This confused me because Bill wasn't closer to Joe than my other kids. I wondered why Bill chose Joe, and it made me anxious. One day, I found 2 old photos of my wife, Connie, at Bill's house. They were inappropriate, and they were taken in Bill's bedroom. My world fell apart. I took the evidence to my parents, and they were as shocked and disgusted as I was. I decided to confront Connie. I took her to Bill's house, thinking we were just going to clean up. But when we sat down, I showed her the bank statement and the pictures. She looked at the statement, clearly surprised by the money Bill had saved. I knew there was much more to talk about, but I was devastated, and I needed time to figure out what to do. I asked Connie if she noticed anything odd on the bank statement, and she initially said no, just the amount. But then I urged her to read it aloud from the top. As she read, she saw Bill's name and the payable on death to Joe part, which made her realize that she was caught. I asked her if there was something she needed to confess, and she initially denied it, shaking her head. But after some persistence, she admitted to her affair with Bill 18 years ago. She explained that it was a stupid and selfish mistake that only lasted a couple of weeks. Connie claimed she had distanced herself from Bill since then, only interacting with him when other family members were around. I asked her if Joe was Bill's son, and she said no, she was certain he was mine, emphasizing that even if he wasn't, she considered him mine since I had raised him. I didn't show her any sympathy or comfort and left her to compose herself. After she cleaned up and came home, we slept in the same bed, but I refused her attempts to get close to me. The next day, I decided to divorce her, and I talked to my parents about it. They were shocked and couldn't believe what had happened. Connie begged me not to go through with it, but I was firm in my decision. Later, I met with a lawyer recommended by our farm attorney to begin the divorce process. We discussed the division of our assets and the possibility of spousal support due to Connie's lack of outside work. Money wasn't my main concern. I just wanted the marriage to end. I returned home and informed Connie of the attorney's advice, and she was upset. Then I told her I would talk to our kids about the situation that weekend, starting with Joe. He and I went to a creek on our farm, and I explained the situation to him. He was devastated and worried, especially about whether I would still love him if he wasn't my biological son. I assured him that I would always love him and that the issue was between his mother and me. The divorce was solely due to her affair and had nothing to do with him. We spent a couple of hours talking, and I mentioned that I would speak to his siblings next. After Joe told me he was ready to talk to his siblings, we all gathered by the pool, pretending everything was normal. However, my wife's odd behavior was evident, and our kids picked up on it right away. We spent the afternoon playing games, but the dark secret loomed. It was after dinner when Joe expressed his readiness to talk to his siblings. Unfortunately, they all had plans with friends that evening, so we decided to hold the conversation the next morning. As a family, we attended Sunday church services, returned home, and then I told the kids that I needed to speak with them privately on the back patio. My daughter inquired if their mom would be joining us, and I explained that she would meet with them later, causing some uneasiness among the kids. I shared the news with them, and their shocked reactions turned to disbelief, anger, and sadness. It was tough to see them process the information. I clarified my intention to divorce their mom, and they all started to cry. We had a lengthy conversation, and eventually they understood my decision. My daughter expressed her anger and reluctance to have anything to do with her mother. I informed them about getting DNA tests for each of them to determine their biological parentage, emphasizing that it wouldn't change my love for them, regardless of the results. That evening, their mom met with them to have an emotional conversation. I was outside but could overhear parts of their discussion. The kids expressed their love for her, but made it clear they would never see her the same way and might not forgive her for her actions, which was tough for her to hear. During the divorce process, my wife tried persuading me to stay together and seek counseling daily, but I remained firm. A significant offer was made to purchase the house my family lived in, and we decided to accept, moving out 60 days later. My wife moved to a nearby apartment and struggled with depression, requiring medication. I moved back to my parents' home temporarily and decided to build my dream log cabin on the farm. I now live there with my 2 youngest kids, while they spend a few nights a week with their mom. My ex-wife wants to reconcile, but I no longer have romantic feelings for her. After all the stress and drama, it turned out that all my kids are biologically mine, but it didn't change my feelings toward my ex-wife. Although I still care about her and want her to be happy, I can't trust her again. Despite everything, I feel content with where I am now and the relationships I have with my kids and my ex-wife. Sharing this story has provided some relief and gratitude for how things turned out, and I wish you all the best of luck.